Chapter 759. The sudden appearance of Sylvia and Owens had undoubtedly disrupted Tang's plan. Although both of them were Earth-rank experts, each person was different. The threat they posed to Tang was naturally much greater than the Earth-rank warriors of the Bounty Hunter Guild. The reason was very simple. If Sylvia had a conflict with the Earth-rank warriors of the Guild, the one who would lose in the end would definitely be the Earth-rank warriors of the Guild. This was the so-called martial arts genius who could challenge those of a higher rank. David scratched his head as he watched the large cavalry troop disappear from sight. He knew how powerful Sylvia was, so his expression was also conflicted. "Boss, what should we do next?" Continue the assassination. "Wait, my mind's a little messy. Let me sort it out first." Tang supported his forehead with one hand, speechless. After a moment, he seemed to have thought of something. He looked up in the direction where the troop had disappeared and muttered to himself, "It's a little strange. Since Sylvia and the others have already rushed over to help, why does Zachary still insist on retreating to the south?" David was stunned. Maybe he feels that it's not safe enough. It was a logical conjecture, but Twain nodded thoughtfully when he heard it. "It makes sense. I killed a lot of Earth-rank warriors earlier. Zachary is naturally worried, so he's still retreating to the south." His eyebrows suddenly raised, and he turned to ask an irrelevant question. "Where's the nearest city from here?" I remember there's a small town a few dozen miles to the west." Harry's brain was the most agile. He only rolled his eyes and quickly gave the answer. Tang indecisively ordered, "Okay, Harry, you take people to that small town now. Contact the secret organization and check on the recent movements of the Temple of Light, especially in the south." "No problem." Harry simply turned around and pointed at a few members of the gray space. They ran to the west together. David frowned. "Boss, are you suspecting that the Temple of Light still has reinforcements coming?" Tang nodded and then sighed. "It's better to be safe than sorry. The Temple of Light is still too powerful. Even if we make the slightest mistake, it is very likely that we will be consigned to eternal damnation. Let's go, let's follow them." The next half a day passed peacefully, but Sylvia and the others seemed to know that the danger was not over yet. Whether it was moving forward, resting, or setting up camp to eat, they would rather slow down to ensure that there was no danger ahead. They were very cautious. Of course, with Tang's strength, if he wanted to launch a surprise attack, he would still have a chance. However, he did not do so and just stayed far behind. To be honest, Tang had mixed feelings about Sylvia. How should he put it? He couldn't be said to have tender feelings for the fairer sex, but he couldn't be as calm as Stillwater either. Perhaps this could only be blamed on himself under the evil body for acting on his own initiative and insisting on playing some dark game. Wouldn't it have been better to just kill him? Still, King force her. Since you King force her, why don't you force her to the end? Cough, cough. Thinking too much. Out of habit, his thoughts were in a mess. In the end, the twilight gradually darkened, and Tang's gloomy and unclear expression gradually became indifferent. He exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Phew! The current Tang was after all not the third-rate student he used to be. After settling down for a long time, he threw away the distracting thoughts in his heart and began to silently think about how to capture Zachary alive or how to kill Sylvia, and at this moment, Harry, who looked hurried, caught up in the dark with some information. Because of Tang, the current secret agency attached great importance to the intelligence of the Temple of Light. This was also the reason why Harry could rush back so quickly. And it turned out that Tang's previous guess was not groundless fears. About 5 days ago, which is when we started the hunt, the Temple of Light in the south sent a team to the north. Their strength is unknown. They said they were here to help purge the fallen clergymen here, but after they arrived, they did not go to the various cities and towns. Instead, they disappeared from everyone's sight. Then, 3 days ago, someone saw traces of them in Hookah City. There were cavalrymen and mages in white robes. After that, they left the city and disappeared, and there was no more news. "Boss, I've checked. If we go in a straight line, We'll bump into the people from Hookah City head-on in 2 days at most. Damn, sure enough. Tangan narrowed his long and narrow eyes, and his expression was a little unsightly. Xiao Weian and the others were enough of a headache. If they were to meet up with this team that was obviously not weak, they would undoubtedly have no chance at all. But this is a little wrong. David scratched his head. Isn't Zachary just a lackey? Where did he get the ability to mobilize the people of the Temple of Light? And just to deal with us, isn't this a little too much? This is not strange, David. A lackey is still a dog, and you still have to look at the master before you beat the dog. Tang and shook his head, and his expression was gloomy. And if I'm not wrong, this team is not just here to deal with us, but to completely uproot our forces. What a big appetite. Oof. David curled his lips in disdain, but after a light snort, he did not say anything in the end. Because that was the truth. Judging from the power of the Temple of Light, they really had such an appetite. At this time, Harry dug out a letter from the intelligence paper and handed it over. Boss, this is the letter that Miss Lena sent to all the cities a few days ago. It's for you. Tangan took it in surprise, opened it, and scanned it up and down. His expression froze for a moment, and then his eyes gradually lit up, and the corners of his mouth unconsciously rose. Ah, it's really better to be early than to be here at the right time. David and Harry were stunned when they heard this. What's wrong, boss? Haha, it's nothing. I just received a big gift. Tangan's mood was obviously better, and the gloomy expression from before was instantly swept away. David, except for Harry and Luke, take everyone back to Coldwater City and move some things from Lena's laboratory. Remember, be quick. Yes. Despite his doubts, David turned around and left without hesitation after receiving the order. Hearing this, Luke walked over and spread his hands. Boss, what should we do? It's very simple. Find the location of the temple team. Slightly stunned, Luke looked at the cavalry in the distance. Oh, what about these people? Are we just going to ignore them? Tangan's expression was relaxed, and he waved his hand confidently. Just go around them. As long as we find the temple team, we don't have to worry about them not coming over. This was the truth. As long as Zachary wanted to keep his life, he would definitely meet up with the temple team. In a short while, the gray space was divided into 2 groups. One group was led by David, and most of the members were heading back. The other group was led by Tang Yin and the other 2. They went around the team that had already set up camp and were resting and rushed straight ahead. But after only a few minutes, Harry suddenly slapped his forehead as if he had thought of something. He said with a strange expression, Boss, I have another piece of news. Little Carol said that you didn't keep your word. You clearly said that you would bring her along this time, but in the end, you ran off alone. She said that she despises you, Tangan couldn't help but rub his nose awkwardly, because the battle in Coldwater City involved a Void Realm martial artist. Tang Yin had indeed promised to bring little Carol along when he comforted her. But a few days ago, he and Raymond had just returned to Coldwater City when they received news from David. At that time, he didn't think too much about it and directly rushed over alone. He had completely forgotten about little Carol. Rubbing his forehead in frustration, Tang Yin changed the topic and complained, What's wrong with kids nowadays? They're all so violent. They're not innocent at all. Harry and Luke looked at each other, their lips twitching in disbelief. Then Luke curled his lip and said the truth. It's all because of you, boss. Harry chuckled, but didn't say anything. Clearly, he agreed. That was the truth. For little Carol to have her current temperament and skills, it was definitely the result of Twain's teachings. Tangan glanced at Luke and smacked his lips. Tisk TSK. I don't talk to people who have been completely defeated by kids. Luke was stumped for a moment, and his calm expression instantly collapsed. Boss, you don't hit people in the face when you hit them, and you don't expose them when you're scolding them. You can't be like this. Chapter 760. 2 days later, in the morning, the rosy rising sun was trying its best to peek out from the east, full of vitality. The thin morning mist was also slowly flowing in the air, stubbornly refusing to disperse. On the other hand, the last wisp of night wind silently swept past the continuous mountain ranges, the winding mountain paths, and a quiet farm before finally disappearing without a trace. The strange thing was that the farmers, who usually got up early, seemed to have collectively slacked off today. They could hear the roosters crowing, but there was no smoke. Just as the atmosphere became more and more strange, more than 10 figures suddenly turned out from behind a low hill and appeared on the north side of the farm. Then, they ran over at a speed that ordinary people could not match. And just as these people appeared, in the fields more than 100 meters to the west of the farm, several figures flashed through the tall crops. "Boss, it's Zachary's guards. They're here," David said softly as he carefully closed the gap between the crops. Tang Yin, who was resting with his eyes closed, suddenly opened his eyes. His gaze was like a bottomless well, distant and cold, but it instantly turned indifferent. He waved his hand and said, "Okay, everything will go according to the plan. Be careful. Don't worry, boss. There won't be any problems." Nodding gently, Tang Yin turned his head and rubbed the soft hair of the short figure beside him. The corner of his mouth rose. "Hee, then you should go and prepare too." "Okay." Little Carol pursed her lips and nodded. Her little face was serious. "But, brother, are you sure someone will come over if we wait there? If no one comes, I'll be angry this time." Tang Yin grinned as if he had a toothache and said innocently, "Please, I'm your brother. Well, have I lied to you? Not long ago, don't pay attention to these details. Go. You won't be disappointed this time." Little Carol raised her head suspiciously and looked at the solemn Tang Yin. She hesitated for a moment, then finally dragged her sickle and disappeared into the crops. Phew! Kids nowadays are getting harder and harder to fool. Tang Yin let out a long sigh and shook his head with a bitter smile, as if relieved of a burden. Seeing this, David came over and asked, "Boss, you're so assured to let little Carol go alone?" Tang Yin glared back at him. "Damn it, you knew that I was worried, yet you still brought her here? It was fine this time. She could handle it. Yes, there will be people there to protect her. I had no choice but to follow her. Boss, you know how good I am at hiding. If little Carol wanted to follow me, I wouldn't have been able to shake her off." David scratched his head awkwardly, and then his eyes flashed. He directly ignored the question of who would protect little Kara. Of course, this didn't need to be said. Now that all the members of the gray space were here, only a certain dead person would have the time to look after little Kara. "All right, after you go back this time, give me extra training." The corner of Tang Yin's mouth twitched. Of course, he knew little Carol's tracking skills because he was the one who taught her. "Don't." David's face suddenly turned bitter. Then he saw Tang Yin wave his hand and was about to leave. He remembered something and quickly said, "By the way, boss, in fact, we could just wait here for Zachary, Sylvia, and the others to enter the farm and kill them together. Why do you have to take this risk?" He muttered to himself, "You think I want to? So much blood energy, what a waste." Tang Yin shook his head and rejected. "No, Zachary is the person in charge of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. He knows a lot of things that are very useful to us. So if possible, it's best to capture him alive." And pause for a while. Tang Yin pointed at the dozen or so figures running wildly and narrowed his eyes. "Do you know why Sylvia didn't come to the farm with them?" Why? Because she's Sylvia? I've seen a lot of people from the Temple of Light. Most of them are disgusting villains. Of course, there are a few different ones. Sylvia is one of them. In a sense, she was a good and righteous person through and through. Well, she's just a little big-boobed, but brainless. Let's not comment on that for now. What do you think, such a righteous person, if she knew that Zachary was a high-ranking member of the Dirty Bounty Hunter Guild and had a close relationship with the Temple of Light? What would she do? David was stunned and said subconsciously, "I'm afraid she would explode." That's why Tang Yin spread his hands. The Temple of Light is also afraid that she would expose this matter if she knew about it. So, the reinforcement team arrived long ago, but only occupied the farm and waited for Zachary to send Sylvia and the others away before they could meet up. If that's the case, David scratched his head. This Sylvia is really a good person? You could think of it that way. But Tang Yin's eyes were a little complicated. After a flash, he shook his head and said indifferently, "She's an enemy after all, and there's no difference between good and bad enemies." After saying that, he waved his hand and disappeared into the field. There's no difference between good and bad enemies. TSK, listen, as expected of the boss. These words are so domineering. David clenched his fists and looked a little excited. But, all right, the boss is gone. Why are you still flattering him? Harry bent over with a look of disdain. Then, he looked around and raised his eyebrows. Shall we begin? Begin. David nodded heavily and waved his hand behind him. Rustle, 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 rustle. Dozens of gray space members crouched down and held the short metal pipes in their hands tightly, as if they were holding a fragile crystal. They carefully moved forward in a single file in the field and kept moving closer to the farm, at this time on a mountain road more than 10 miles away from the farm. Thank you very much for escorting me here safely. This is the territory of my good friend's family. I've sent someone to greet them. I'm sure someone will come to greet me soon. After pausing for a while, Zachary made a half bow with a sincere look and said politely, Sirs, how about you come with me to my good friend's territory so that I can invite my good friend to entertain you too, to express his gratitude? This was undoubtedly a polite remark. Zachary certainly knew the temperament of the two people in front of him. Sure enough, Owens shook his head with a smile. Thank you for your kind invitation, Sir Zachary. But this is what we clergymen should do. We really don't deserve such gratitude. Well, I can only say sorry. Oh, that's a pity. As expected of an old man, Zachary was a genuine actor. Hearing this, he shook his head slightly, and his expression was full of unconcealable disappointment. On the other hand, Sylvia looked at the surrounding barren mountains and frowned slightly. Sir Zachary, are you sure your good friend can guarantee your safety? Sorry, I didn't mean to offend you, but looking at the injuries of your guards, that bad guy should be very strong. My lord, there's something you don't know. The reason why the guard were injured was because they accidentally stepped into the trap set by that bad guy. That's why they ended up in such a sorry state. Zachary was obviously prepared. He said the excuse he had made up and said confidently, but it's fine now. My good friend is a local viscount and also a general who returned from the battlefield. His identity naturally can't be compared to the two of you, my lords. But he still has some elite soldiers under his command. I've already informed him of what happened before, so there's absolutely no problem in terms of safety. Pause for a while, he continued to smile easily. Besides, although that bad guy isn't weak, he didn't dare to make a move on me these 2 days. Obviously, when he saw the two of you coming, he was afraid. Maybe he had already given up on escaping. Since Zachary had already said so, Xiao Weian and Owens naturally couldn't say anything more. Their mission was to escort Zachary here, and now they had accomplished their mission. Even if there were any changes in the future, it had nothing to do with them. Sylvia and Owens looked at each other. Although they were a little puzzled that Zachary seemed to be eager to drive them away, they didn't think much about it and were about to bow and leave. Suddenly, a voice mixed with a sense of ridicule was heard. Fear in the heart. Are you sure? Her body stiffened. Hearing this extremely familiar voice, Sylvia's expression was a little incredulous. Then, she slowly turned her head. Her eyes were sharp like knives as she stared at the left hill in front of her, at the figure that kept appearing in her dreams in the middle of the night. She gritted her teeth. Pang! Yes. Chapter 761. Pang! Yes. Although the morning mist had yet to disperse and the figure on the hill looked blurry, Xiao Weian's intuition strongly reminded her that she definitely did not recognize the wrong person. Light laughter came from the morning fog. The blurry figure waved his hand and said in a non-committal tone, Long time no see, Sylvia. It's you. It's him. Zachary on the side came back to his senses and subconsciously took a few steps back. His expression changed instantly. He pointed at the figure and said hurriedly, My two lords, this is the bad guy who has been chasing me. Owens raised his eyebrows when he heard this. He glanced at Xiao Weian, whose body was tense, like a bow ready to strike. He stretched out his hand and untied the long spear hanging on the side of the horse. He was also full of fighting spirit. Owens did not know Tang Yin, but this did not hinder his determination to get back at him. After all, the scene that happened on the ship was really embarrassing. Good. You dare. Sylvia's lips were tightly pressed into a line. She said each word stiffly, as if it was squeezed out from between her teeth. Then she took a deep breath. With a serious expression, she slowly raised the long spear and pointed it at the top of the hill. Since you dare to come, then come down and die. Come down and die, come down and die. Sylvia suddenly roared the last 4 words, shaking the mountain and echoing continuously. Owens was startled. He naturally knew Sylvia's character very well. She was a person who liked to do more than talk. If she had already recognized the other party as an enemy, she would not talk nonsense and would not listen to the other party's filthy words. She would directly smash the other party with her spear and beat them to death. It was really rare for her to express such strong emotions before a battle. In any case, we're acquaintances. There's no need to be so passionate about fighting and killing upon meeting. Tang Yin rubbed his nose and unconsciously avoided the burning gazes from below. He slowly walked down the hill. Actually, I'm here for Zachary this time. Sigh. Before he could finish speaking, whoosh, a devastating and dazzling tyrannical spear aura had already pierced through the thin morning mist, whistling through the air. With a sigh and a shake of his head, Tang Yin's figure flickered slightly, and he instantly moved over 100 feet away from his original spot. Boom! The hill trembled slightly, and soil and rocks flew everywhere. A huge crater was instantly opened up halfway up the hill. Brandishing her spear, Sylvia stepped forward and squinted her eyes. If you want to kill him, you have to get through me first. Swish! Swish! Owens brandished his spear and stepped forward with a warm smile on his face. Me too. Huh? Shaking his head and chuckling, Tang Yin spread his hands and continued walking. Actually, you know that it's not easy for me to defeat you. But if I just want to kill Zachary, you can't stop me. Sylvia pursed her lips, and her expression became even more solemn. This was the truth. Previously, both sides had been chasing each other for more than a month, so Sylvia was naturally very clear about Tang Yin's ability. If Tang Yin was bent on killing Zachary, then they really might not be able to stop him. This was not a matter of strength, but of speed. This was also the reason why Sylvia had restrained herself until now and did not directly attack. Owens was naturally aware of this situation. Although it was a bit embarrassing to say it, after the battle of pure attack speed on the boat, he now had no confidence in his spear technique being able to block the opponent's assassination attack. He raised his eyebrows and looked at the sallow-faced, middle-aged man in front of him. Tang Yin? Well, no matter what, you're still a martial arts expert. There's no need to use such underhanded means to threaten me. This was an out-and-out provocation, but Owens did not hide it. Because as long as it was an expert, more or less, they would be a little arrogant. This was not a derogatory meaning, but confidence in one's own strength. 200 feet away, Tang Yin stopped in his tracks and looked at Owens. He tilted his head and thought for a while, then the corner of his mouth rose. Okay, then let's have a fair fight, so that you'll be convinced. These words were spoken resolutely and decisively, powerful and resonating. Owens could not help but feel happy when he heard this. He was about to solemnly nod and agree to this battle. But Owens, don't believe him. As long as it comes from his mouth, even if it's a word, never believe it. Moving sideways, Sylvia cautiously blocked in front of Zachary, her expression gloomy. Because this is a damn guy who never knows what dignity and morality are. Owens was stunned. Then he looked at Tang Yin, who shook his head helplessly with a you-saw-through-me look. Cold sweat slowly dripped down from his temples. Damn it, beat him at his own game? I was almost fooled, wasn't I? Hee. It's the first time we meet, so I'm just joking. Don't mind. Looking at Owens's somewhat hurt expression, Tang Yin innocently spread his hands and casually glossed over this little episode. You really think that way? Owens's mouth twitched, and he was completely speechless. For a moment, he only felt that his IQ was seriously not enough. At this moment, there was a sudden roar. Do it! Seeing that Tang Yin's gaze moved away from her, Sylvia's eyes flashed. She stepped on the ground, and her figure decisively rushed forward. At the same time, the long spear that was piercing straight ahead soared with blazing flames, wantonly dancing enchantingly with awe-inspiring power. Playing a sneak attack, you've also become bad. Curling his lips, Tang Yin naturally would not be hit by this simple sneak attack. As he complained, his figure gently swayed away like a willow catkin in the wind. However, before he landed on the ground, hiss hiss hiss, the slight but concentrated sound of something breaking through the air instantly assaulted his side. It was Owens, who had arrived just in time to attack. Tang Yin's expression did not change. He slowly raised his right hand as if it were an illusion. A dagger had appeared in his palm at some point, and he pointed it out. Ding! There was a clear sound of collision, and the spear shadows that filled the sky instantly disappeared. Seeing that his exquisite spear technique was instantly broken, Owens was not discouraged. He sidestepped to avoid Tang Yin's knife, and Sylvia's long spear had already smashed down from behind. Good! Seeing such complementary tacit cooperation, Tang Yin could not help but praise sincerely. He instantly retracted his dagger and dodged to the side. Whoosh! Even though Sylvia's tyrannical spear did not hit its target, in the midst of the whistling sound, the strong wind still caused a gully that was several feet long, and fresh soil rolled out. On the other side, Tang Yin, who had just dodged, was once again entangled by Owens's spear shadows that filled the sky. It had to be said that Sylvia and Owens were indeed the most suitable partners. Sylvia's attack was tyrannical and direct, and it was powerful. Owens's spear technique was delicate and flawless, delicate and meticulous. It was exactly one hard and one soft, one main attack and one entangled. It was seamless and perfect. Putting away her long spear, Sylvia glanced at Owens, who was already struggling. She did not immediately go to help, but turned to the light knights who were gradually surrounding them and shouted, "Retreat! Take Sir Zachary away from here, quickly!" This was the real purpose of Sylvia's attack. If she let Tang Yin assassinate first, she was not sure that she could guarantee Zachary's safety. So, only by entangling Tang Yin first, and then letting Zachary and the knights who could not intervene leave, she and Owens could fight without any worries. Tang Yin's eyes flickered when he heard her words, and his face was fierce. He snorted coldly. Humph, you want to leave? His hands suddenly opened wide, and his black robe fluttered. The crisscrossing blood-colored blade light surged out violently, and instantly suppressed the spear shadows that filled the sky. Roar! Looking up and roaring, Owens knew that the critical moment had come. The warm smile that had been hanging on the corner of his mouth disappeared, and it was replaced by a deep and dignified expression. The holy spear shadows in his palm were like a torrent that was released from the dam, surging in an instant, and the sea was wanton. As soon as the blood-colored blade and the pure and holy spear shadow came into contact, an intense confrontation erupted between the two of them. Red and white mixed together, mixed with specks of sparks that would occasionally collide. It was a magnificent and fatal beauty that dazzled one's eyes. In a sense, the attacking style of Tang Yin and Owens was very similar. They both won with speed and relied on subtle attacks that were impossible to resist to defeat the opponent. In this way, the only difference was the depth of the realm of the two sides. Soon, the spear shadows that filled the sky with explosive hand speed were suppressed again. Owens knew that the reason why he was defeated in the last battle on the ship was obviously not because of his state. Fortunately, before Owens's decline expanded, Sylvia had already rushed over with her spear. However, she did not use the overbearing spear technique that was big and wide. Instead, she used the delicate spear technique that she was not good at. Their primary goal now was not to risk their lives, but to entangle Tang in as much as possible and let Zachary and the others completely withdraw from the battle circle. However, This kind of attack method that used speed to fight speed was obviously not suitable for Sylvia. Although her talent was outstanding and she had trained hard for this for a long time, and she could be considered to have some small achievements, it was obvious that she still could not keep up with the rhythm of Tang Yin and Owens. However, Sylvia did not give up. She was willing to be Owens' assistant. She struggled to support the dense spear net and not be broken by Tang and sharp blade light. Of course, this kind of simple cooperation naturally would not bring any threat to Tang Yin. The corners of his mouth gradually rose, revealing a sly smile of success. After a fleeting moment, his long and narrow eyes suddenly narrowed. A blade light suddenly separated from the whole body. Like a swimming fish, it crookedly passed through the dense spear net and stabbed Owens' heart. Roar! At the critical moment, Sylvia let out a sharp and long cry. Her fancy spear technique suddenly changed. It was just a simple smash, but an indomitable and tragic murderous aura instantly filled the place. Boom! The airwaves rolled like the clouds in the dark rain. The dazzling fighting light directly exploded. Rays of holy light radiated in all directions, shining brilliantly. And, a stifled groan and a delighted laugh. 3 figures flew out from the center of the explosion, respectively. They landed and rolled, then patted the ground and stood up. Cough, cough. A few coughs came from the gray airwaves. A blurry figure suddenly staggered. He leaned on the ground with his spear and stood firmly. Then, he raised his hand to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. He turned his head to look at the bleeding hole on his left shoulder and shook his head slightly. Owens? Sylvia's voice came from another direction. Then, the airwaves in the field, together with the hazy morning fog, were instantly swept away by a swift and fierce wind from the spear. I'm fine. Gasping for breath, Owens raised his hand and drew a few mysterious gestures in front of his chest. A little white light appeared out of thin air. The next moment, under the guidance of the light, it went straight into the hole on his left shoulder, barely stopping the bleeding. It was just a simple healing magic. As a Holy Knight captain, Owens could naturally easily cast it. However, although he was injured, Owens's expression did not have any ruthlessness. On the contrary, there was a bit of joy. Just now, if Sylvia had not reacted quickly and decisively swung her spear to smash the blade, then this hole would have appeared on his heart. The scene returned to normal again, except for Tang Yin and the other 2 who stood at a distance in a triangular position. Zachary and a large group of Knights of Light had disappeared. Obviously, they had taken advantage of the time when they were fighting to stay far away. Seeing this, Sylvia could not help but feel relieved. She slightly exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. Then, she narrowed her eyes and turned to stare at Tang Yin. There was a faint madness in her eyes that was constantly gathering. Tang Yin did not feel anything. He did not look regretful that he had let Zachary go. Instead, he chuckled twice, and the corner of his mouth revealed a few traces of ridicule. You guys, do you know who that Zachary is? You protected him without any principles. He answered his own question. There's no harm in telling you. He is the person in charge of the Northern Bounty Hunter Guild. TSK. When did the Holy Temple of Light get together with the Dirty Bounty Hunter Guild? They even sent 2 Holy Knight captains to protect him. Interesting, really interesting. The mocking laughter echoed in the field, but Sylvia was not moved at all. She pursed her lips and said coldly, Nonsense. Tang Yin laughed and shook his head. I knew you wouldn't believe it. Well, if I said that the Temple of Light sent a team of reinforcements, including Holy Knight captains like you, and a few magicians wearing white robes with a golden cross embroidered on their chest, waiting for Zachary at the farm 10 miles away, you wouldn't believe it either, right? Sylvia did not say a word. She was miserably deceived by Tang Yin, so no matter what Tang Yin said, her mind would automatically add the sentence, this is a lie. She basically would not believe it. But Owens was different. He frowned slightly and thought to himself, a golden cross embroidered on their chest. That means they're the high priests of the Temple of Light. The people of the Temple of Light would not easily leave the headquarters. Very few outsiders knew about it. Could it be that this Tang and had really seen it. Thinking about it again, and thinking of Zachary's vague intention to send them away, his heart faintly believed it. After all, Owens was different from Sylvia. Although his belief in the god of light was firm, he was meticulous and did not fear to doubt. Previously, he doubted the authenticity of the miracle in Ma City, and that was an example. Tisk, no matter how much nonsense you talk, you can't escape death today. With a cold snort, Sylvia did not want to listen to Tang En's nonsense anymore. In other words, she did not want to see Tang and speak again. She turned her long spear, and the blazing fighting aura wantonly rose again. It seemed to be slow, but was actually fast. Come on, do I need to lie to you? Besides, shrugging his shoulders, Tang En's mouth hung a faint smile. He tapped the ground with the tip of his foot and quickly retreated. You can't beat me. Oomph. With a cold snort, Sylvia had already entered a crazy fighting state. Of course, she would not pay attention to this kind of talk. Although Owens had already somewhat believed Tang En's words, it was naturally inappropriate to say it at this time. Without hesitation, he also grabbed his long spear and attacked Tang En. At this time on the farm, the sun in the east had not completely peeked out when it was covered by a large cloud, which seemed to indicate that today's weather would not be too good. However, no matter how fickle the weather was, when the faint roar of Tang En and others fighting came, no one would think that it was thunder in the clouds. Dozens of figures walked out from all over the farm. They frowned and looked up at the mountain range in the north. What's going on? A middle-aged man, wearing the same armor as Owens, turned to look at the Earth Stage warrior next to him. He was the guard sent by Zachary to act as the vanguard. Isn't that the direction you came from? I don't know, sir. It was still fine when we came. Could it be? The Earth Stage warrior's expression changed. The person who chased us before made a move again. The assassin who may have touched the threshold of void level. This middle-aged man obviously also heard the Earth Stage warrior's report before. He frowned even more. To be able to create such a scene, it should be Sylvia and Owens fighting with the other party. This is troublesome. A few of the Temple of Light's big shots who were obviously of high status also frowned when they heard this. They were silent. This so-called trouble was, of course, not referring to the assassin who may have touched the threshold of void level. It should be known that the team that came this time was very strong. Even if the other party was a real void level powerhouse, they still had the power to fight. But Sylvia and Owens, just as Tang had expected, Sylvia and Owens did not know about the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. Those present who knew about it did not dare to let them know. Especially Sylvia. Once she knew about this and investigated it, there would definitely be a big mess and even shake the foundation of the temple. After pondering for a while, the middle-aged man decisively ordered the Earth Stage warriors. The meeting plan is canceled. You all rush back now. If it really is that assassin, you all will help Sylvia and the others to defeat the other party. Then, let Zachary find an excuse to change his direction. As for the time and place of the next meeting, we will find another opportunity to inform you. Obviously, compared to the safety of Zachary and the others, the middle-aged man was undoubtedly more worried that Sylvia would find out about this. Yes. The Earth Stage warriors naturally had no status in front of these people. They nodded dryly when they heard this. All right, go. With a wave of his hand, the middle-aged man turned around and said to a few elders wearing white robes with a golden cross embroidered on their chests, Everyone, in order to prevent any accidents, we should also seize the time to retreat. His words paused. The middle-aged man's gaze shifted upwards and stared blankly at the sky above the western rooftops. About a dozen fireballs were flying at a low altitude. In an instant, they traversed hundreds of feet of thin gauze morning fog and smashed down like meteorites. Further behind, a dozen fireballs were rising slowly. Their target was still this farm. He muttered in a low voice, What is this, boom? Boom! Boom! In an instant, it was as if dozens of evil dragons had raised their heads and roared. Streaks of fire soared into the sky. Immediately after, the rolling air waves radiated in a ring. The space rippled, and a row upon row of low farmhouses, as if they were made of sand, were directly crushed into dregs by this terrifying force. Boom! 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 The wave of explosions had not yet stopped when dozens of fireballs were thrown down from behind. Another wave of destructive force swept across the farm again, cleansing the space. This was only the prelude. Those seemingly ordinary but actually powerful fireballs were still rising slowly from the west. They did not let go of any corner of the farm. It seemed that they were determined to raze this place to the ground. They would not stop until the underground water gushed out. What farm? What Earth-stage warriors? What Holy Knight Commander? What Templar High Priest? At this moment, they were all ants. They were all dust, because this was the end of the world. Chapter 762. The morning fog was gray, and the rising sun from the east was completely hidden behind the clouds. It seemed that it could not bear to look at the scene of the farm and the mountains, of course. No one could see the outline of the farm at this time. There was only the blazing fire that soared into the sky, and the rolling air waves and thick smoke. Occasionally, there would be some white light flashing in the air. Those were a few oval-shaped things that looked like duck eggs, and they were hurriedly flying away. Looking closer, it turned out that they were a few old men who were holding up a magic shield. Their originally white hair had turned yellow and withered, and their originally holy white robes were also covered in black ash. Their mouths were wide open, and their faces were extremely twisted and ferocious. Shock, fear, despair. All kinds of negative emotions were mixed together and gathered together. It was probably the final struggle before death. Unfortunately, in the next moment, a circular air wave swept past with spatial ripples. The thick and condensed magic shield was like a fragile soap bubble, and it shattered and turned into nothingness. F***CK. In the field, David squatted down and looked up, staring blankly at the Templar mage who had turned into ashes. He opened his mouth, and only after a long while did he manage to hold back a curse. David was clear that there were about 100 people in the team of the Temple of Light in the farm. It could be said that each of them was not weak and could be considered a top elite team of the Temple of Light. However, now that the powerful Templar mage had ended up like this, there was no need to think about those holy knights and priests. Harry, who was at the side, was not much better. He looked at the destroyed farm in a daze and muttered unconsciously, F***CK. This little thing, its power is so terrifying. The so-called little thing was naturally the short metal cannon barrel that the dozens of members of the gray space were constantly fiddling with beside them. Loading, shifting, stabilizing the cannon body, a few simple actions, boom. A stream of fire jumped out of the cannon mouth. Needless to say, this was naturally the battlefield killing weapon that Z had personally designed and successfully modified by Lena over many years. Previously, when Tang received Lena's letter, it was about the successful modification and production of this killing weapon. He had to admit that this news came at the right time. When Tang saw that Sylvia and Owens had suddenly come to disrupt the situation and also learned that there was an elite team from the Temple of Light coming to reinforce them, Tang really wanted to give up at that time. This had nothing to do with whether he was confident or not. It was just that in the face of such a huge force, assassination methods, schemes, and so on were not worth mentioning. If he were to force his way in, he would most likely be crushed to smithereens. However, after learning that Lena had completed the modification of the killing weapon, everything changed. Z had suppressed this killing weapon for more than 10 years. Apart from the barbarians in the northern wilderness who had a deep understanding of it, very few people in the entire Size continent knew about it. Bran, in particular, had no idea what was going on, and this gave Tang room to operate. Now, this operation was bringing about doomsday effects. The metal tube was still trembling. Because they had just started operating it not long ago, the members of the gray space were very nervous. They meticulously followed the operation steps and did not have the leisure to watch the firing effect, so they were not as shocked as David and Harry. Among them, the member closest to David and Harry raised his head slightly, and was startled. Then he turned his head and asked, "Captain, do we continue?" Just by looking at the thick smoke rising into the sky, the fate of the small farm could be imagined. That was why he asked this question. Hearing this, Harry was stunned. Then, the corners of his mouth twitched subconsciously. The shock from before was instantly covered by a pained expression. The power of this unknown gadget was indeed terrifying, but the price they had to pay for it was not small. Because the fireballs that were fired were actually expensive explosive crystals. Attack. Continue attacking. David did not think much and waved his hand decisively. Wait. Harry hurriedly grabbed David's arm and pointed to the explosion scene not far away. Do you think anyone can survive under this kind of abnormally strong bombardment? Slightly stunned, I don't think so. This was the truth. Under this kind of indiscriminate bombardment, let alone the unprepared temple team, even the well-prepared void-level cultivators would have to think about how to escape from here as quickly as possible instead of courting death to resist. However, David scratched his head, thought for a while, and said, "But the boss said before that we must use up all the explosive crystals we brought this time." Listen, the boss continue. Yes. Oh. Hearing this, Harry clutched his chest and leaned back. His expression was tangled, as if a large piece of his heart had been dug out. The way he looked at the sky also changed. What kind of fireball was this? It was clearly a sky full of gold coins. Too extravagant, too wasteful, too unbearable. More than 10 miles east of the town, in the thorny barren land. Huff, panting heavily, Zachary ran alone in the barren land, not distinguishing between east and west. Even though the thorny bushes cut through his clothes and skin, he did not seem to feel it. From time to time, he would look back in a panic, listening to the faint screams behind him. His face was pale, his lips trembled, and there was a look of panic on his face. I've escaped. I've already escaped. Hoochie. They don't know the direction I chose. Yes, those Knights of Light can also buy me some time. At least 5 minutes, that's right. Hoochie. As long as I find a hidden place to hide, nobody can find me. The nervous murmur seemed to give Zachary a lot of confidence, and his footsteps became faster as he ran for his life. It had to be said that Tang On's precise control of a small area had reached an astonishing level. Sylvia and Owens thought that as long as they delayed Tang in, they could smoothly let the large group of knights protect Zachary and escape. But who would have thought that this was within Tang Un's expectations? Not long after Zachary withdrew from the battle, he was assassinated by more than 10 unknown people. In fact, they were the members of the Gray Space, led by Michaud. Although the strength of the Light Knights was good, in this rugged mountain, they could not use their riding tactics at all. In an instant, they fell into a disadvantage under the many strange assassination methods of Michaud and others. Seeing that the situation was not good, Zachary was naturally the first to escape. The Light Knights also cooperated with him, desperately entangling Michaud and others to protect him. Of course, he ran away, but the fate of the Light Knights was undoubtedly doomed. Another scream faintly came from behind, and Zachary's body could not help but tremble as he ran. His feet staggered, and he rolled down the gentle slope in embarrassment. Fortunately, this gentle slope was not long. After crushing a section of thorns, Zachary struggled to get up from the ground with a bloody face. "Damn it, he cursed as he looked up, and his expression could not help but be stunned. Not far away, one after another, low mounds were endless, filling the entire line of sight. Near each mound, there was a gray stone tablet, standing alone. Under the gray gauze of the morning fog, it looked dense and lonely. Cemetery, bah! After recognizing this scene, Zachary could not help but secretly curse his bad luck, his face ugly. This scene, coupled with his own situation, made it difficult for him not to think of something bad. Right at this moment, bang, bang, bang. It was like a thunderclap had erupted in the horizon, and dense and muffled sounds of rumbling resounded in succession, causing one's mind to be shaken and awed. Zachary could not help but be stunned when he heard the sound. He subconsciously looked in the direction of the farm and was completely dumbfounded. What's going on? Is there a fight there too? And this momentum, is it a battle between Void Masters? Trembling, Zachary did not dare to hesitate. He no longer cared about his bad luck and rushed into the cemetery. But after only running a dozen steps and turning around a mound, Zachary's footsteps could not help but stop again. In the mist more than 10 meters away, on top of a tombstone, a slightly short black shadow was sitting on it, carrying a huge scythe on its shoulder and swinging its legs in the air. It seemed to be a little bored, humming an unknown, soothing tune with its head down, leisurely and contentedly. It had to be said that this scene was a bit strange. At least Zachary was shocked, trying to squint his old eyes, his heart beating fast. Human? Ghost? Death god? Just as Zachary was making a lot of judgments in his mind, the soothing tune suddenly stopped. The short shadow seemed to have noticed his gaze and raised its head to look at him. Tilting its head, it seemed to be a little girl and smiled vaguely. It was a very satisfied smile. "Oh, I've been waiting for you for a long time. Your Excellency, Zachary." Chapter 763. Tall and sturdy, malnourished trees, grotesquely shaped rocks, small patches of grass, large patches of shrubs, and perhaps some birds and beasts. In short, it was a very ordinary hill. But at this moment, rustling sounds could be heard. The leaves were swaying, the rocks were moving, the grass was trembling, and the birds and beasts were fleeing. The mountain was trembling slightly and constantly. Finally, with a boom, the left side of the mountain was directly broken from the inside and exploded. A dazzling holy light shot out from the hole, instantly cutting through the gray morning fog. It was also at this moment, whoosh, a figure with a long afterimage suddenly leaped out, landing on the ground and rolling sideways. He looked very disheveled, but it was undeniable that he had escaped the range of the holy light at the most critical moment. Before it could get up, it slapped the ground, and with a bang, the figure flew out at a 90-degree angle close to the ground. Boom, boom, boom. At this moment, the left side of the mountain once again broke through the sharp spear light, completely covering the place where the figure had been and creating rows of terrifying bottomless pits. After dodging the predictive attack with extreme precision, the illusory figure was very happy. "Ha! I told you can't beat me. Ah, you can't even hit me now." Before the voice finished speaking, two more figures jumped out of the cave with a whoosh. Their armor was still lofty, but it was stained with the black mountain dust and was no longer holy. As the two figures jumped out, suddenly a little bit of the left side of the mountain collapsed, and the ancient trees fell, boulders rolled, and dust flew everywhere. In an instant, it was a pile of ruins. As if she didn't feel anything, Sylvia casually shook off her broken right shoulder armor, and with a serious expression and crazed eyes, she waved her spear and was about to attack again. However, after a few coughs, Owens, who was one step behind, was the most pathetic. Although he hadn't lost his ability to fight, the bloodstains all over his body were a shocking sight. Xiao Weian stopped in her tracks and turned around to take a look. She frowned slightly. "I'm fine again." Owens took a deep breath, and his fingers holding the spear trembled slightly, as if he was excited and nervous. In fact, he was twitching. In terms of overall strength, Owens was undoubtedly the weakest of the three. Not to mention that he had been tricked by Tang in the beginning and injured his left arm. For example, he was tasked with fighting Tang in head-on in terms of attack speed, so the pressure he faced was actually heavier than Sylvia's. Therefore, it was reasonable for him to end up in such a sorry state. "Hee, still want to fight?" Tang spread out his hands from 100 meters away and said in a joking tone, "I admit that it's very difficult to kill martial arts geniuses like you. I'll definitely have to pay a heavy price. But don't blame me for being too frank. It's impossible for you to kill me. You can't even defeat me. Do you still want to continue?" These words were half true and half false. It was undeniable that psychological warfare was involved. After this short fight, Tang Yin learned a lot about the tacit cooperation between Sylvia and Owens. He had to admit that the cooperation between the two of them was perfect. Although Owens was in a sorry state, he had been holding back and limiting the intensity of Tang Yin's attacks. As for Xiao Weian, there was no need to say anything. She had always been domineering and overbearing. The collapse of the mountain next to her was the best proof of that. To be honest, Tang Yin was also a little troubled by such cooperation. They were like hedgehogs, and he basically couldn't do it. For the time being, he could only resort to psychological warfare and verbal attacks. Of course, at the same time, Tang Yin really didn't want to fight anymore. Because calculating the time, it was time to start at the farm, and it was time to finish at Zachary's side. The mission was completed successfully, and there was indeed no more value in risking their lives. Sylvia pursed her lips, and her expression was still stubborn and crazy. She opened her mouth and wanted to say something. Suddenly, boom, 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 the ground trembled slightly, as if an earth dragon had awakened below. Tang Yin raised his eyebrows and suddenly turned to look in the direction of the farm. He looked overjoyed. Aha, it's done. Damn! Before the joy spread from the corners of his mouth, Tang Yin suddenly jumped up in a sorry state. A tyrannical long spear instantly blasted the place where he was standing just now. Without waiting for the soil and stones to splash, the long spear went forward again and chased after him. Needless to say, the attacker was naturally Sylvia. Tang Yin's sudden distraction had undoubtedly given her a great opportunity. If she couldn't even grasp this opportunity, she would be ashamed of the bloody storm she had experienced for more than 10 years. Owens naturally wouldn't fall behind when Sylvia attacked. Although he had some distracting thoughts about the continuous explosions, his coordination was not the slightest bit careless. The two masters joined forces in an instant and immediately forced Tang Yin into a disadvantageous position. However, Tang Yin was not afraid at this time. As long as the farm was settled, the purpose of this trip would be more than half completed, and there was no more pressure in his heart. Now, he could advance or retreat. As long as he got a chance to escape, no one could stop him. In a relaxed state of mind, Tang Yin dealt with the attacks of the two people while squinting and smiling. Haha, do you know what this explosion, what it means? While speaking intermittently, he avoided Sylvia's heavy spear. Do you still remember what I said before? The blade trembled and instantly suppressed Owen's counterattacking spear net. That's right. The ones being bombarded are your temple's reinforcements. More than 100 people and many experts, just like that. Just like that, they disappeared into thin air and turned into dust. The dense spear net suddenly paused. Owens was indeed stunned. It should be known that he somewhat believed what Tang Yin had said before. Now that he heard this shocking news, his heart was shocked, and his hands naturally slowed down. Tang Yin was an expert at finding loopholes. He could naturally accurately grasp such an obvious flaw. With a long laugh, he decisively threw away Owens and pounced on Sylvia. Good. Although the situation of the battle was reversed, Sylvia did not have the slightest intention of avoiding. The spear trembled slightly, and she judged the distance between them, looking for the most suitable time to attack. Now is the time. A sharp light flashed in her eyes. Sylvia decisively swung her arm and smashed the spear down. The force was heavy, and the wind whistled. Tang Yin did not dodge. His long and narrow eyes almost narrowed into slits as he stared at the spear smashing toward his head. The corners of his mouth suddenly rose, and he slowly raised his left hand. It was gentle, as if there was no trace of smoke or fire. But when the whistling spear was infinitely approaching, he raised his hand to the top of his head and brushed away the spear. Catching the spear with bare hands? Or Sylvia's spear? If this was spread out, he would be regarded as shameless bragging, and his face would be covered in saliva. But now, that was the truth. Oh, that was not right, because Tang Yin's left palm was still a few inches away from the spear. It seemed infinitely close, but also infinitely far away. It looked very awkward. In fact, Sylvia felt even more awkward. Just a moment ago, when she saw Tang in catching her spear with his bare hands, she thought that his brain had suddenly gone haywire, and she was delighted. However, in the next moment, Sylvia felt a strange force coming from the spear, and she instantly frowned. That was not right. The force was not right. The distance was also not right. The spear was clearly only a few inches away from Tangen's palm, and even the top of his head, but Sylvia felt that her spear had already fallen a long distance, and the force of the spear had also been silently absorbed by more than half. This feeling, it was as if the distance of a few inches was actually a bottomless lake in the middle, and it was also absorbing and dispersing the force of the falling object. The power of space. After a slight daze, Sylvia immediately recognized the source of this strange feeling. At this moment, Tangen's face suddenly turned pale, and he could no longer hold on. He was only at the stage of exploring the use of space power, and it was not systematic. Naturally, it was impossible for him to completely withstand Sylvia's attack. Fortunately, he only needed the spear to stop for a moment. He took half a step forward, closed in on Sylvia, and thrust the blood dagger forward. "You can't beat me, ah!" she screamed. Sylvia was still Sylvia. Although she was caught off guard, she made the right choice, and that was to use all her strength to stimulate the fighting aura around her body, and the fighting aura armor appeared again outside the steel armor. Bang! The bloody light suddenly shone brightly in the narrow space. Sylvia only felt a tightness in her chest, and her delicate body unconsciously leaned back and flew backward. At the same time, the god's armor on her chest shattered inch by inch, and kept falling off. Tang groaned, and blood seeped out of the corner of his mouth. It was obvious that he was not in a good condition. However, his agility was not affected at all. He seized this obvious loophole and rushed out instantly. "Be careful." Owens's belated warning came, and this time, Tang was already more than 10 feet away. He turned his head and looked at Sylvia, who was flying parallel to him on the left side. His eyes unconsciously moved down and fell on the curve of her underwear that was sticking up high as the breastplate shattered. He raised his eyebrows slightly and opened his mouth silently. Wow, women were always sensitive to the eyes that fell on them. Not to mention that Sylvia also turned her head at this time. In an instant, his blood surged up along with his explosive anger. His pale face suddenly turned red, and there was a sweet taste in his throat. He opened his mouth, and a large amount of blood mist came out. Puff! Chapter 764. I've been waiting for you for a long time. Your Excellency, Zachary. Although the scene was a little strange and the voice was a little cold and ethereal, there was a hint of joy in the tone, so it did not exceed the scope of a human. But somehow, when the voice entered Zachary's ears, it was as if a basin of ice water had been poured over his head. It seeped into the deepest part of his body, as if he had fallen into an ice cellar. The next moment, before he could recover, there was a slight sound of clothes fluttering. The short figure stepped on the tombstone and leaped into the air. When she reached the highest point, she stretched her body and raised the black scythe high up like a bow, slashing down with a whoosh. Is it really a little girl? What a joke. Although Zachary was old and had not fought for many years, he was still the person in charge of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Naturally, he had the strength. Seeing this, he was stunned at first. Then he subconsciously rolled to the side and dodged in a sorry state. Looking up, he had just taken out a short sword from his waist. Before he could get up, Zachary's vision suddenly darkened. The huge scythe was already in front of him. In shock, he hurriedly waved his sword to block. Ding! With a crisp sound of collision, the short sword flew high into the air and instantly disappeared into the gray mist. It flew to an unknown place. Then, with a bang, Zachary felt a pain in his chest. As if he had been hit by a galloping horse, he flew backward. Whoosh! The chain rolled back and wrapped around his arm. Raising her hand, the little girl calmly caught the huge scythe that was spinning rapidly. She frowned slightly and looked at Zachary, who was struggling to get up after hitting the mound. "I've been waiting for you for a long time, but you can't even take one strike from me." Her faint voice did not hide her disappointment and regret. Zachary's old face heated up. Even with his rich experience, he could not help but feel that his self-esteem had been severely damaged. But more than that, he was shocked. "Who are you?" "Sorry." With a calm gaze, the little girl took a step forward and instantly appeared in front of Zachary. The strange blade light appeared again. "I don't think there's a need to introduce myself." Her words were not pleasant to the ears, but that was the actual situation now. Most of the otherworldly weapons were sabers, swords, and spears. It was rare for warriors to use a scythe as a common weapon. It was not only because of the concept, but also because of the common problem of new things, which was that there was no complete attack and defense system. If he were to recklessly play around with it, it was very likely that he would be injured by this strange blade light. And this little girl, little Carol, was undoubtedly the lucky one. She had Tang In, a close combat expert, to give her pointers. She also had the old butler in the system, a powerful shield, secretly supporting her from behind. Therefore, she was very good at using the scythe. And once one became familiar with this kind of unpopular weapon, the power it could unleash would also become quite terrifying. Streaks of strange blade light came from all sorts of unbelievable angles. Zachary's body was old, and he was not good at dodging in the first place. The only thing he could rely on was his rich combat experience, but it was useless in front of this completely novel attack method. He was completely stunned in an instant and fell into a precarious situation. 100 meters away from this one-sided battle, a figure stood quietly behind the tombstone. The eyes under the silver mask flickered with a somewhat complicated expression. In the next moment, he seemed to have felt something. His body suddenly shook, but then he relaxed again. He turned his head and saw a middle-aged man with a sallow face silently walking over. "Yes, boss," Michaud nodded. "And how is it?" Tang In narrowed his eyes at the battle scene under the gray fog and asked casually. Shaking his head, Michaud spread out his hands and said, "From the current situation, I don't think I have a chance to protect her." This was the truth. After a brief observation, Tang In could see that there was no suspense in this battle. The reason why it had dragged on until now was because little Carol had not used her full strength. Withdrawing his gaze, Tang In waved his hand and said, "Clean up the traces and tell your people to retreat." "Yes." Michaud nodded lightly and retreated into the gray fog like a ghost, disappearing in an instant. "It's finally over." Tang In sighed emotionally, shook his head, and stepped forward. At this time, the battle in the field was also coming to an end. Little Carol was indeed playing, and she was also venting her dissatisfaction. It must be known that this opportunity was fought for with great difficulty, and she had waited here for a long time. Previously, Tang In said that he had an important mission for her, and that was to capture the other party's hidden big boss alive. Originally, little Carol was still happy that she was valued, and she excitedly came with her scythe. But who would have thought that this boss was too weak? Well, since this is the case, let's end it. Little Carol, whose interest was exhausted, narrowed her eyes, and the power of her blade suddenly increased. In an instant, Zachary, who was barely able to resist, was trapped in a net of blades. Seeing the opportunity, the blade flipped over and quickly lashed out like a long whip. Zachary, who was already dizzy, was naturally unable to resist. He felt a pain in his shoulder, and with a bang, his body spun and flew out horizontally. If there were no accidents, Zachary would smash a tombstone in the next moment, and his head would bleed and he would faint. But at this moment, a figure suddenly turned out from behind the tombstone, shook his head, and stretched out his hand. "It's very impolite to disturb the rest of the deceased." After saying this, a hand knife directly knocked Zachary unconscious. "Brother." Little Carol pursed her lips, put away her scythe, and walked over. "You lied to me again," Tang In mentioned Zachary with an innocent face. "How did I lie to you?" "You said." Opening her mouth, little Carol was stunned to find that she had nothing to say, because Tang In had done what he promised before, including arranging an important mission for her and coming here to wait. In the end, Zachary did come. As for Zachary's strength, She forgot to ask, and of course, Brother Tang wouldn't tell her. After holding it in for a moment, little Carol could only scare him with a frosty face. Brother is so treacherous. How can you say that about your brother? It's very sad, isn't it? Besides, it's not the first day you know your brother, huh? With a loud laugh, Tang Yin shrugged without any pressure, and then put his arm around little Carol's shoulder. Okay, it's over. Let's go, let's retreat. Soon, the cemetery was still gloomy, but the tall and short figures had disappeared into the gray morning fog. With the sudden stop of the intensive explosions, the battle had indeed come to an end. At this point, Tang Yun's operation was a complete victory. Not only did he capture Zachary, the head of the Bounty Hunter Guild, but he also killed the elite team of the Temple of Light. It could be said that he was beating a rabbit in the grass, and no one was left behind. Of course, there were winners and losers. This matter was far from over for Sylvia and Owens in the mountains. At this time, the Knights of Light began to return one after another. They were the knights who had escorted Zachary away before. Although the members of the Gray Space led by Misho had the upper hand, it was naturally impossible to kill all of the Knights of Light. Besides, there was no need to do so. What? You were attacked and suffered heavy casualties? Zachary is also missing. Well, as expected. Holding his forehead, Owens waved his hand and sent away the cavalry who came to report. His expression was complicated, and he smiled bitterly. At this time, the meticulous Owens naturally knew that they were under the opponent's calculation from the beginning to the end. It could be said that they were completely defeated. Sigh. With a sigh, Owens turned his head and looked around. He looked at Sylvia, who was sitting silently with her head buried in her knees. He shook his head slightly and walked over. He scratched his head and hesitated. Sorry, and this time I dragged you down. To some extent, Owens was right. Although he had done his best, his strength was still slightly weaker than Sylvia. Therefore, their teamwork could not be perfect. It might not be obvious when facing a weaker opponent, but when facing Twain, Owens became an out-and-out shortcoming and a breakthrough point. However, when Sylvia heard this, she bit her lip and shook her head. After a while, she slowly said, "It's not your fault. It's his strength that has improved." Don't forget, Sylvia had fought with Tang Yin before. In the previous month-long pursuit, her strength was obviously higher than Tang Yun's. It was precisely because of this that she was able to force Tang into the northern wilderness. But she never thought that after just a few months, when the two sides met again, the strength of the other side would suppress her. Looking up, after the previous anger and killing intent receded, Sylvia's eyes were a little confused. Not boasting, Sylvia was a martial arts genius. This was an indisputable fact. But now, after seeing Tang Yun's abnormal speed of improvement, she was at a loss. There is actually someone in the world who could be reborn in such a short time. It was as if he had become a different person. Can I still catch up? Can I still kill him? Do I still have a chance to eliminate that devil's nightmare? After a moment of silence, Sylvia pursed her lips and slowly got up. Let's go. Where to? To the farm he mentioned before. Owens was stunned, his eyes flashing. Didn't you say that it was nonsense? Forget it. There's no need. Sylvia did not stop walking. During the battle, I pretended not to hear anything he said. But now that the battle is over, as a clergyman of the Temple of Light, I have to investigate. Rubbing his forehead, Owens was a little hesitant. Do we really have to go? Sylvia paused, narrowed her eyes, and turned her head. Her expression was solemn, and there was a faint sense of danger. What do you know? Is what he said true? Of course not. I'm just guessing. Owen's expression was a little bitter. In fact, he already believed what Tang had said before. But because of this, he did not want to and could not let Sylvia know the truth. Owens was very clear in his heart that Sylvia was different from him. He knew some of the ugly secrets of the Temple of Light, and he could tolerate it because of the overall situation, and because once it was exposed, it would cause an immeasurable disaster. But Sylvia would not. She was a person who hated evil to the extreme. If he let her know these, the consequences would be unimaginable. But no matter how unwilling Owens was, it was obvious that he could not stop Sylvia from going to the farm now. Chapter 765. 2 days later, by the Hansui River, about 100 meters away from Lena's alchemy laboratory, in front of a large house with tightly sealed doors and windows. A woman in a scholar's robe pointed at the surroundings and explained to the ordinary-looking young man beside her. This used to be a few cloth workshops, but business wasn't very good. After I bought it in the name of the Yadong Chamber of Commerce, it became a place to produce weapons. Of course, on the surface, we also buy some cloth as a simple cover. The young man smiled and nodded. Haha, good idea. You're very thoughtful. I didn't come up with it. Your people came up with the idea. Usually, your people are responsible for guarding this place. This is the only entrance. Shaking her head, the woman extended her hand and invited the young man to pass through the newly built stone wall. She knocked on the locked iron door. Uncle Fu, Uncle Fu. Uncle Fu is the guard of this first iron door. He's a good person. Oh, look at me. He's also from your secret organization. You must know him. As she spoke, an old man with white hair walked out from behind the iron door. He had a smile on his face. Haha, Miss Lena, you're here. Lord Tang Yin, good morning. He quickly stepped forward and bowed. Needless to say, the young man and woman were Lena and Tang Yin, who had just returned. Waving his hand through the iron door, Tang Yin said politely to the old man who looked familiar, Uncle Fu, you're welcome. It's my pleasure, my pleasure. After bowing, the old man quickly opened the iron door. Lena smiled and walked in. Haha, thank you, Uncle Fu. After passing through the iron door, Tang Yin looked at the high walls around them and nodded slightly. Lena seemed to understand his intention. She walked in front and said, the security here is very tight. Other than you, me, and David, who came last time, no one else is allowed to enter or leave. Well, the production area is in front. Pause for a while, she continued. The people in charge of production are also sent by the secret organization. They're very clever. Although they don't know much about alchemy, the weapon structure is very simple. They can basically make it after some training. Oh, that's right. How's the actual combat power of the weapon? Pausing slightly, Tang Yin tilted his head and thought about the farm that had completely disappeared and turned into a deep pit. He nodded heavily. Very good, very powerful. That's good. Lena's eyes curved into crescents as she smiled happily. It was unknown whether she was happy because her modification was recognized or because she could help Tang Yin. It was probably the latter. After passing through layers of guards under Lena's lead, Tang Yin finally arrived at his destination, which was the place where weapons were produced. It looked like a huge warehouse. It was probably a combination of several cloth workshops, so the space inside was unusually spacious. As soon as he stepped in, all sorts of clamorous sounds of cutting, grinding, forging, and so on and so forth entered his ears, and it was extremely noisy. Tang Yin couldn't help but be stunned when he heard the noise and stood still. Lena on the side covered her mouth and laughed. She leaned closer and shouted, Are you scared? I did on purpose. Every few dozen meters outside the house, there's a magic stone that silences sound. It's changed every day, so the sound inside can't be transmitted out. At such a close distance, Lena's loud shout was almost drowned out by the noise, and it became as soft as a mosquito's buzz. Tang Yin shrugged when he heard this. He didn't care about Lena's little prank. Instead, he narrowed his eyes and stared at the dense crowd coming and going in front of him. Most of them were young men with strong bodies. Some were waving sledgehammers to carve something. Their faces were red from the reflection of the furnace, and they raised their hand from time to wipe away the rain-like sweat. Some were running around with many small parts in their arms, and they looked hurried. Some were assembling with their heads down, and they looked focused. There were also a few people who seemed to have encountered some problems. They opened their mouths and shouted. They should be discussing, but it looked like they were quarreling. Tang Yin spread his hands and took a deep breath. The smell of rust, sweat, tung oil, and other unknown smells filled his nose. Tang Yin didn't care at all. Instead, his heart trembled, and he suddenly felt a great sense of pride. Is this my military factory? It feels so good. Tang Yin had reason to believe that although no one knew about this weapon workshop hidden in the city, and although it was inconspicuous, it was destined to cause a sensation in Bran and shake the entire Shiza mainland. It was time to turn the page of this era. Tang Yin and Lena didn't stay inside for long. Although they were excited to see this scene, it was indeed not a suitable place to talk. However, although they walked out of here, the buzzing in their ears didn't stop and kept circling. At this time, Lena suddenly asked, "Have you thought about giving this weapon a name?" Tang Yin couldn't help but be stunned. He touched his nose and said, "I haven't really thought about it, but it's time to give it a formal name." "Well, what do you suggest?" "Me? I can't do it. This weapon wasn't created by me, so according to the unwritten rules of the alchemy world, I have no right to name it." "There's such a rule?" Tang Yin was stunned. He scratched his head and said, "Didn't you participate in the modification? It's just a name, it doesn't matter." Modification is far from enough, and more importantly, Lena spread her hands and said helplessly, "I'm not good at naming." "Well, that's troublesome. What should I call it?" He rubbed his eyebrows and said, "Green Dragon Crescent Cannon? It sounds good, but it's not close." "Thunderbolt Cannon? It's quite loud, but too tacky." "Thunder God Cannon? Domineering is domineering, but it doesn't sound good." "Well, the Green Dragon Crescent Cannon that killed Thunder God? Well, it seems that I'm not good at naming." "Huh." Lena covered her mouth and bent over to laugh. Obviously, she was also shocked by the names Tang Yin came up with. Thinking about it, she couldn't expect too much from a person who could name an epic-making alchemy item, a washing machine. She waved her hand angrily and said, forget it, we'll talk about this later." At this time, Tang Yin's heart suddenly moved. He thought about it and said, "Tisk, how about Purple Boar Cannon?" "Purple Boar Cannon?" Lena blinked. "But the inside of the metal barrel isn't purple." "That's not a problem, it's just a name. Besides, it's easy to dye it." After a pause, Tang Yin looked a little sad. "It's also a memento for someone." Yes, Tang Yin thought of Z, the genius who really brought this weapon to the world. But obviously, directly naming this weapon after Z was undoubtedly inappropriate because this weapon was destined to bring many memories to the Bran in the future. Z was the Bran god of war, and now he had become the eternal monument of the Bran's guardian god in the eyes of all the people. Such a lofty honor was the so-called name in life and death. Tang Yin benefited a lot from Z, so naturally, he couldn't let Z's glory be tarnished because of him. After thinking about it, he could only choose one of the words, Purple Boar Cannon, Purple Boar Cannon. After repeating it a few times, Lena smiled and nodded. "Well, although this name is a little ordinary, I have to say it's much better than the domineering names you came up with before." "Ha! I'll let someone add the dyeing process at the end." "Ah, that's good." After finally settling on the name of the weapon, Tang Yin couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. He felt more pressured than the battle with Sylvia. After chatting for a while, the two came to the Iron Gate again. It was also at this time that Tang Yin thought of something. He rubbed his hands and looked solemn and hesitant. "Lena, yes? Thank you. Well, I also feel that this thank you is very insincere, especially when you've helped me so much. But I'm sorry, I really don't know how to thank you." Hearing this, Lena was stunned. Her clear eyes flashed with a trace of fluctuation, but it disappeared very quickly. The corners of her mouth rose, revealing a bright and beautiful smile. "Hee, just to say this, I thought it was something else." She tilted her head. "Don't tell me you forgot? You've already given me a reward and remuneration." Tang Yin was stunned. Did I?" "Here." Lena smiled as she raised her right hand and shook it. Ding ding dong dong. On her wrist that was as white as jade, a multicolored bracelet made of corals, agates, crystals, and diamonds shone brightly under the warm light. The bracelets gently collided with each other, and the sound was pleasant to the ear like wind chimes. Tang Yin naturally recognized this bracelet. It was the item that he had bought at the Shanghai City auction house to create the image of a nouveau riche. But of course, Tang Yin had no use for it himself. He had originally wanted to give it to little Carol, but after some thought, he felt that it was a little inappropriate. After all, Little Carol's age and cold temperament clearly did not match this extravagant bracelet. In the end, he asked someone to give it to Lena. He didn't have any other intentions. After all, he only had 2 girls by his side, so he didn't have a choice. Rubbing his nose, Tang and spread out his hands and said, "Okay, as long as you like it." "And thank you, I like it a lot." Lena raised her head and smiled brightly. "How could I not like something you gave me?" Chapter 766. Noon. In a remote residence in Hansui City. In an independent courtyard, the doors and windows were tightly shut. Bright light shone on the impure crystal glass, reflecting an amber-like magnificent color. Occasionally, a butterfly would be attracted by the confusion and stop temporarily. Perhaps it realized that it wasn't a petal, so it flapped its gorgeous wings and left again. Phew! Sighing faintly, Zachary's eyelids drooped slightly as he retracted his gaze from the crystal glass where the butterfly flew away. There was a hidden fear and panic in his expression, but most of it was still confusion and confusion. Yes, he was at a loss. Zachary was sent here late last night. Originally, he thought that he would be greeted with rounds and rounds of torture until he would rather die than submit, or until he was no longer of any value after being tortured. Then, he would be silently killed. This was a very normal process. Ever since Zachary discovered that he wasn't killed on the spot, he had mentally prepared himself for this. Fear? Fear? Of course, he had these emotions, but Zachary was confident that he could take them lightly. After all, he had lived a good life with most of his life experience. Thus, there was nothing to be afraid of. But just as he was considering whether he should choose to die rather than submit and bring the secret to God or the devil, or to suffer less before death and obediently cooperate with the other party's questioning, it had to be said that this was a rather distressing choice. Zachary himself was also somewhat hesitant, but then he realized that things didn't go as he expected. Half a night had already passed. During this time, Zachary didn't close his eyes to rest, and no one came to interrogate him, let alone threaten him with torture. He felt as if he had been forgotten by others, just like this remote and independent courtyard, cold and cheerless, with no one showing any interest in it. Rubbing his eyebrows, the deep bags under his eyes also moved. Zachary was now vaguely regretful. If he had known this would happen, he would have had a good sleep last night. At this moment, there was a polite knock on the door. Is he finally here? Zachary's spirits were immediately lifted when he heard the sound. He sat up straight and maintained the demeanor of a big shot. "Please come in." Creak. The wooden door was pushed open, and a young man walked in with a tray. The steaming hot food constantly emitted an enticing aroma. Zachary frowned when he saw this. He had seen this person before. Breakfast was brought in by this person in the morning. Obviously, this person was not here to interrogate. "I'm sorry, I don't know your taste, so it's just some home-cooked dishes. If you have any dietary restrictions or preferences, please feel free to tell us. We will try our best to satisfy you." After putting down the food, the young man said politely with a smile on his face. Hearing this, Zachary was slightly startled. He lowered his head and looked at the dishes on the table. Although they were not very expensive, they looked, smelled, and tasted good. He opened his mouth, raised his head, and laughed at himself. The last delicious meal? I didn't expect that I would have such great influence. You're thinking too much. The young man shrugged and turned to leave without saying anything else. Wait, what are you trying to do? Zachary pressed the wooden table and finally couldn't help but ask in a deep voice. Are you trying to bribe me with this? I can tell you very clearly right now that I won't say anything. This was Zachary's probing. After all, the situation before him was too strange. However, the young man was not moved at all. He turned sideways and spread out his hands. Who cares? When he reached the door, the young man stopped in his tracks. He still didn't close the door. He turned his head and said calmly, "By the way, if you feel too bored in your room, you can go to the courtyard to move around. As long as you don't leave here, it's fine. Of course, you can't leave either. Okay, I hope you have a good appetite and enjoy this wonderful lunch." After saying this, the young man disappeared outside the courtyard, leaving Zachary looking at him with a stunned expression. After a while, he shook his head inexplicably, picked up his knife and fork, and began to enjoy this wonderful lunch. At this time, on the roof, a chubby figure was lying on his stomach. He took out a pen and paper from his chest and muttered to himself, "What the hell is this? You're eating and drinking down there, and I'm drinking up there? This is really—" He shook his head speechlessly. "Well, let me see. A fork in your left hand and a knife in your right hand. Okay, congratulations, you're not left-handed. You like to eat vegetables and have less meat. TSK, TSK. Old people, you don't have that kind of appetite. Pity me. Yo, the way you eat is quite elegant, but it's too damn slow." As he talked, he waved his quill and wrote quickly. It seemed that he wanted to record every movement of Zachary, who was eating down there in detail. It had to be said that this scene was a little strange. Although peeping at a beauty taking a bath was vulgar enough, one could imagine the reason, so it wasn't too exaggerated. But peeping at an old man eating, this behavior could no longer be described as perverted. It really couldn't be explained. In fact, as the cold wind blew from time to time, the pages of the book flipped. Some descriptions of sitting and walking postures could also be seen. The level of detail was simply astonishing. After about half an hour, the person on the roof stood up, gently closed the pen and paper, and covered the gap between the roof tiles. He raised his head and let out a long sigh. "Damn, I've been eating for half a day. Are you trying to make me anxious to death?" "Eh." He paused and suddenly turned his head. Only then did he realize that a figure had already reached the roof. The figure waved his hand and walked over silently. "Boss." His expression relaxed, and he also waved his hand to greet him. "Ha, how is it, Harry? Did you get anything?" Tang In walked over with a smile. His voice was controlled between the two of them. "Here, it's all here." Passing over the pen and paper, Harry helplessly spread out his hands. "Boss, I don't understand. What's the use of these trivial things to us? Moreover, if we want to know these things, we could just torture him directly." Shaking his head, he said, "Haha, of course it's useful. You must know that when people are nervous, their actions will always be a little different from usual." Tangen took the paper, flipped through it, and nodded. "Let's continue. We still have about 3 days. We must be clear about Zachary's work and rest schedule, daily habits, etc. This is very important." Pausing, he patted Harry's shoulder. "This time, let's play a game of borrowing the chicken to lay eggs. It's very interesting." "All right, I don't have any problems. It's just that." Harry pointed at his feet and grinned. "Seeing him eat and drink so well makes me unhappy." "Huh, be considerate. He won't have many good days." Tang In chuckled and shook his head. "Well, how about this? 3 days later, I'll leave the interrogation of him to you. How about that? Wow, I think I can't wait." Haha. Not to mention the meaning of borrowing the chicken to lay eggs, Tang In fell into a busy state after leaving this place. Since the production of the Purple Boar Cannon had begun on a large scale, the alchemy materials needed were a big problem. Z was the commander of an army. Whatever he needed, regardless of whether it was illegal or not, he only needed to pass a command and someone would naturally deliver it to him. However, Tang naturally couldn't do that. He could only operate through the black market, and not just through the black market of one city. Otherwise, it was very likely that he would be exposed. Moreover, once the weapon was made, it was undoubtedly impossible to just leave it in Hanshui City. There were too many variables. Therefore, Tang had to arrange for people to transport it into the 100,000 Mountains, pass through the layers of defense of Blank's army, and deliver it to Josiah of the Gray Coat Army. Yes, these things could be solved, but it would take a lot of time. Moreover, because of the self-evident importance, Tang didn't dare to let others do it. He could only do it himself. In addition to these, the farce of the secret manual worth $500 was fermenting rapidly. Tang had to pay attention to it. Also, because of the strong suppression of the Temple of Light, the fake miracles, the various ugly secrets of the clergy, and so on, these incidents that should have caused a huge uproar were quickly calming down. In this way, as the victim's family, Tang An, of course, had to catch a few clergy as examples to publicize his plan and continue to slander the Temple of Light. What? Establish an assassin organization? Oh, this wasn't urgent, because there was a ready-made one waiting for Tang to take over. P.S. Bowing to Thankbook friend JHD121 for the tip. Chapter 767. As Tang An busied himself, a week passed by quickly. Blackwood City, a small city in the north. There was nothing special about it. It was early in the morning. On the street, opposite a small tavern in the western part of the city, an ordinary carriage slowly stopped. The coachman was a thin man wearing a wide-brimmed hat with his collar turned up. His face and age could not be seen clearly. It seemed to be a random stop. The coachman had no intention of getting off the carriage. The rear door of the carriage was still closed. After about 10 minutes, the coachman pressed down the brim of his hat and slowly got off the carriage. He walked cautiously toward the tavern opposite. The brim of his hat was slightly turned. He was probably constantly observing the situation around him. His body was visibly tense. He was like a mouse that had just left its hole. Once it realized something was wrong, it would immediately jump back. However, after slowly crossing the street, the coachman suddenly sped up and rushed into the small tavern in 3 steps. He stopped in front of the counter for a moment. Then, he was led inside by a waiter and disappeared through the back door of the tavern. Soon, in the backyard of the tavern, President, it's great that you're okay. Elder Luo and the others are all dead. 3 old men who received the news quickly walked out of the house and surrounded the coachman. They were either surprised or panicked. These 3 old men were the higher-ups of the Bounty Hunter Guild. When they received the news of Sylvia's arrival, Tang An did not have time to deal with these higher-ups who had split up and escaped. Taking off his wide-brimmed hat, curly hair and wrinkled old face, the coachman, no, Zachary, waved his hand with a gloomy face and shouted angrily, "What are you panicking for? They're not all dead yet. Let's talk inside." After saying that, he left these trembling old men and walked into the house first. After entering the hall and sitting down, Zachary's cold eyes swept across the 3 old men. He paused on the old man in brown clothes. The atmosphere was cold and solemn. He said in a deep voice, "The same mistake will not be allowed to be made a second time. Someone, bring me a pen and paper." Under the confused gazes of the 3 old men, a guild guard walked in with a pen and paper. Zachary pointed at the table beside him and said slowly, "Sit here. I'll talk and you'll remember. Not long after we parted ways, I ran into Sylvia and Owens, who came to rescue me. Then we headed south for 2 days, hoping to meet up with the reinforcements of the temple. In the end, right before the meeting, that damned assassin appeared again. The 2 sirs went forward to stop him while I escaped under the protection of the Knights of Light. But I didn't expect that we would be intercepted again." Zachary paused for a moment, and a fierce and pained look flashed across his face. "I escaped alone and hid in the graveyard. Since I had no other way to escape, I could only dig up the dirt bag in the graveyard. I hid there for 3 days, then came out and wandered in the wild for 2 days. In the end, I entered Wildstone Town 3 days ago and searched for information. This is my whereabouts over the past few days. If there's nothing suspicious, it's your turn now." The 3 old men were stunned when they heard this. They had successfully escaped at that time, so they naturally didn't think that Zachary would suffer such hardships after that. As for the meaning behind Zachary's words, they finally understood, especially the brown-clothed old man. His eyes flinched when he heard this. At that time, it was because of him that the group of terrifying assassins found the mountain village, which directly led to the tragedy that happened next. This kind of mistake couldn't be made a second time. Next, the 3 old men separately reported their whereabouts after they separated. It was very simple and similar. After all, their escape was indeed very smooth. After a while, Zachary took the paper and quietly looked at it. From time to time, he asked about the location, witnesses, and so on. It seemed that he didn't find any clues, so he slowly put it down and closed his eyes to meditate. The hall was silent. Although Zachary usually had the appearance of a kind and benevolent person, that was only in front of outsiders. The three elders were naturally aware of his temperamental character. They sat upright and still, not even daring to breathe loudly. Everyone. After a while, Zachary slowly opened his eyes. His face was gloomy like water. I have bad news to tell you. The reinforcements of the temple's elite team were completely annihilated. None of them survived. What? How could it be? It's over. The purpose of this group of elite team from the temple's headquarters couldn't be exposed, so their whereabouts were kept secret. The three old men didn't know either. Now that they heard this, they couldn't help but turn pale with fright and exclaim repeatedly, "Shut up!" With a stern shout, Zachary rolled his old eyes and stared around. I saw it with my own eyes. How could it be fake? The hall suddenly became quiet. Zachary rubbed his eyebrows, looking tired. I don't want to know how the other party did it now. I just want to know how we should deal with the anger from the temple. Do you have any suggestions? The three old men looked at each other. They hung their heads powerlessly, and their faces were ashen. What Zachary said was undoubtedly a practical problem. This reinforcements from the temple's headquarters had many important people. Now that they were all killed quietly, it was naturally impossible to pretend that nothing had happened. More importantly, they didn't have a clue as to who the culprit was. They had undoubtedly become the temple's only punching bag. It wasn't an exaggeration to say that this could very well lead to death. After a moment of silence, the brown-robed old man hesitantly said, "Since the whole team was wiped out, what if we say that we didn't see the other party from beginning to end?" The other two old men's eyes brightened when they heard this. Yes, they knew that the team was finished, but others didn't know. In this way, as long as the temple couldn't confirm the death of this team, then naturally they couldn't blame it on them. But stupid. Zachary frowned and scolded angrily. Did you forget what I just said? At that time, Sylvia and Owens were both present. They didn't die. Do you think they'll help us hide it? Of course not. The answer was self-evident. Why don't we hurry up and find those damned assassins? Are you confident? Then, how about finding a scapegoat? Good idea. Find a mother asterisk cur who dares to offend the Temple of Light. Do you believe it? All right, whether you believe it or not. I asterisk king believe it. Ideas were constantly coming up, but they were quickly overturned. In the end, the hall fell into silence again. It was unusually oppressive. It was also at this time that Zachary exhaled and stood up. His face was expressionless. Since you can't think of anything, then we can only do this. Looking up in surprise, the three old men's faces lit up with joy. President, you have an idea? Come here. Zachary didn't answer. Instead, he waved to the guard who had been standing behind the table, trembling with fear, and pointed to the hall in front of him. Go there. Yes, it's there. Stand there and don't move. Zachary walked a few steps forward and patted the shoulder of the guard who had a blank look on his face. The corner of his mouth rose. You did well. Very well. As soon as he finished speaking, Zachary suddenly stretched out his hand and instantly pulled out the sword at the guard's waist. He turned sideways and stabbed out. Pooh! Blood spurted out. The old man in brown tightly grasped the blade that pierced through his left chest. His eyes bulged and his expression was painful. Why? Why? Letting go of the sword hilt, Zachary took a step forward and hugged the old man's shoulder. His expression was sorrowful. I'm sorry. I'm really sorry. People have to die, but you're the most suitable, he muttered in a low voice with sincerity. However, the two high-level old men at the side watched this scene unfold before their eyes. Their bodies stiffened and their expressions were wooden. They couldn't recover for a long time. After an unknown period of time, when the old man in brown's blood gradually dried up, Zachary let go and took out a handkerchief to carefully wipe the blood on his palm. He didn't even raise his head. Many of the guild's branch locations were destroyed because someone leaked the information. More than half of the people who went to negotiate were killed because someone cooperated with us from the inside. We were hunted down because someone brought the enemy over. The Temple of Light's team was completely wiped out because someone leaked the reinforcements route and location. Not bad, it all makes sense. So, throwing out a blood-red handkerchief to cover the old man in Brown's eyes, Zachary's expression was calm. He's the traitor. All of this was secretly planned by him. Does anyone have any other opinions? Spreading out his hands, he half turned to look at the two high-level old men. The latter trembled and shook their heads. Very good, we agree. Dismissed. Chapter 768. As soon as he came back, Zachary used thunder to cut through the Gordian knot, showing what it meant to be temperamental. However, the two elders did not feel much sympathy for this result. After all, the truth was in front of them. The Temple of Light team was destroyed, and someone had to be the Temple of Light's punching bag. The brown-clothed elder who was involved in this incident was indeed very suspicious. Moreover, even if he was not the traitor, since someone had to be the scapegoat, this brown-clothed elder who caused more than half of the casualties was undoubtedly the most ideal candidate. However, as the two elders sat in the hall in a daze and considered the gains and losses of this move, they did not notice a detail. After Zachary went out, the paper that was originally placed on the table to record his whereabouts disappeared. Hiss. On the small path outside the hall, Zachary looked left and right toward the paper and threw it into the ornamental plants at the side. Then he stretched. It's so easy to sneak in. It's really not challenging at all. What should I do next? He rubbed his eyebrows. Right, I need to borrow the chicken to lay eggs. The Bounty Hunter Guild is such a good platform. As the guild leader, I naturally have a responsibility to find a good owner for them. TSK. It seems to be more accurate to call it a turtle dove occupying a magpie's nest. As he spoke, he walked to the end of the path and met a guard who was standing still. His expression became slightly serious. After thinking for a while, he walked over. Excuse me, where is the guild's trading information room? Over there, sir. You know me? Oh, thank you. Do well, young man. I have high hopes for you. Needless to say, Zachary's real identity was naturally Tang In. In terms of disguise, Tang In's level was enough to look down on the otherworld thieves. Moreover, in order to achieve the perfect effect this time, he spent a whole 3 days observing and recording Zachary's every move and every word. Only then did he succeed in passing off the false as the real one. Of course, appearance, behavior, and other external things could be known through observation. However, it was absolutely impossible to completely copy a person's inner thoughts and memories. It was precisely because of this that Twain put on a strong front right from the start and demanded to check everyone's whereabouts with great fanfare. This could be seen as a classic example of playing the blame game and confusing the line of sight. However, the reason why Tang In spent so much time and made such thorough preparations was not as simple as deceiving the 3 remaining high-ranking officials. There were 2 purposes for Tang to disguise himself as Zachary and come here. One was to use his identity to quietly swallow up some ready-made branch guilds and use them as the foundation of his assassin organization. The second was to find evidence of collusion between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. That's right. At first, Tang In wanted to directly destroy the Bounty Hunter Guild and establish his own assassin organization to take over this large empty market. However, plans could not keep up with changes. Recently, he had encountered a very real problem. He was out of money. To be honest, this question made people a little speechless. Tang In had originally thought that the Yadong Chamber of Commerce's daily income would be enough to cover the initial expenses of the assassin organization. However, this idea was directly shattered with the appearance of the purple bore cannon. It was true that the purple bore cannon was a weapon of mass destruction and would inevitably play a pivotal role in the battlefield in the future. However, all this could not hide the fact that this thing burned too much money. The prohibited materials for the cannon body could only be purchased at a high price from the black market. As for the exploding crystals that were thrown out, it was an astronomical expenditure that was enough to make one's jaw drop. And the assassin organization was undoubtedly not as important as the purple bore cannon. Therefore, Tang In changed his mind at the last minute to capture Zachary alive, and then disguise himself to directly pick up the ready-made ones as for the second purpose. It was now imminent and urgently needed Tang In to settle it in a short period of time. It could not be helped. The relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild was obvious. If Tang In wanted to successfully open his assassin organization, besides destroying the Bounty Hunter Guild, he also had to attack the Temple of Light's influence in the north. Otherwise, his organization would not have a moment of peace. However, it had to be said that the Temple of Light's influence was too great. Some of the things that Tang In was doing now, such as forging miracles, exposing the ugliness and evilness of the clergy, slandering, and so on, could only slightly shake the foundation of the temple. To put it bluntly, it was only slightly better than scratching an itch through one's boots. Of course, this would not affect the Temple of Light, so he had to think of a way to be ruthless, Tang, and set his sights on the relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild. One was holy, and the other was dirty. If the holy were always dirty, then what kind of effect would such a strong contrast have? Tang was looking forward to it. Of course, words were not proof. Everything had to be based on evidence. In fact, over the years, there had always been people like Raymond who protested against the Temple of Light, but these people were not as lucky as Raymond and often disappeared without a trace. The reason for this was self-evident. Some of these assassinations were done by bounty hunters when they accepted missions. However, there were also those with special identities, such as Raymond's father, who couldn't appear on the guild's mission board. The Temple of Light could only send out private assassins to assassinate them. What Tang In was looking for now was the records and evidence of these assassinations. There was no doubt that these records definitely existed. Otherwise, how could they be rewarded based on merit? From Zachary's mouth, Tang In had also confirmed that these records did indeed exist. However, according to Zachary, he was just a puppet. He did not have these records and could only be stored somewhere in the Temple of Light. Tang In also believed this, but everything had to be seen. Therefore, after inquiring about the location, Tang In coughed a few times and walked to the guild's trading information room with a serious face. 3 days. Tang In openly stayed in this small city's guild for 3 days as Zachary. However, perhaps it was because of his crow's beak, but Tang In did not find any evidence of the records. Instead, he received a notice from the Northern Temple of Light headquarters, asking them to hurry over as soon as possible. Obviously, this was the rhythm of settling scores after the autumn. Unlike the other two elders who were worried, Tang In was a little happy because if this evidence really existed, the probability of it being in the Northern Temple of Light headquarters was undoubtedly very high. Meanwhile, while Tang In and the other two were preparing the car in the Bounty Hunter Guild in Coldwater City. Hello, let me introduce myself. My name is Jack, and I'll be the next leader of this guild. This is the transfer order. Oh, and congratulations on your promotion. In the secret room, a middle-aged man looked at the people who suddenly appeared in front of him and was stunned. Then, he took the transfer order doubtfully and opened it. After confirming the authenticity of the secret mark, seal, and so on, he could not help but look serious. Then, he browsed the contents of the transfer order and was overjoyed. Welcome, welcome. Waving his hand, the burly man called Jack had a serious expression. We came directly from the leader. The situation is urgent now, and we need to take action immediately. So let's not waste time on pleasantries. Let's do the handover first. Oh, I understand. That's not a problem. The transfer order not only stated that this burly man would be the next leader of the branch, but also the content of promoting the previous leader's position. Therefore, although this burly man's attitude was not very good, the middle-aged man did not have any resistance and cooperated with him to hand over the vault key, specific work, and so on clearly. At this point, the burly man's serious expression eased slightly and a smile appeared at the corner of his mouth. The matter is urgent. I've just arrived and I've offended you just now. I've already booked a table at the best tavern in the city. I hope you'll do me the honor and send me off as an apology. Haha, brother, what are you talking about? The middle-aged man was in a good mood and waved his hand with a smile. Since you're here, naturally, I should be the one to treat you. After such a delay, in the end, the burly man acted as the host and led the middle-aged man and a few people with some status in the guild away. After a while, when they arrived at a remote street in the south of the city, suddenly, boom, in a violent explosion, the carriage behind turned into a huge ball of fire and soared into the sky. Many of the windows of the surrounding houses were also shattered. Faint figures peeked out to sea, and they were stunned. He, sending me off, is not fake, but I'm afraid you won't be able to drink this wine. Looking at the wreckage of the carriage behind him, the burly man grinned and put down the curtain. Then he took out a bundle of transfer orders and flipped through it. Let's go to the next city. Chapter 769. If there were 10 lights in the world, 9 of them would be in the holy city of light. This was a sentence in the teachings of the Temple of Light, used to describe the flawless brilliance of the temple headquarters, the holy city of light. However, Tangen's destination this time was not the holy city of light, but the northern temple headquarters, Holy Light City, also known as the Little City of Light. It was just a reversal of the order of the words, but the scale of the two could not be compared. However, the Temple of Light was the Temple of Light after all. Even if it was a small northern temple headquarters, it was enough to make people feel emotional and shocked when seeing Holy Light City for the first time. It was undoubtedly the first time Tang En saw Holy Light City. So when the carriage arrived outside Holy Light City in the morning 5 days later, Tang En could not help but stare blankly when he lifted the curtain of the carriage. It was located on a plain surrounded by green water. Looking around, there were countless old buildings, high and low, arranged in rows. Because the outer wall tiles were only white and yellow, it did not look messy, but had a picturesque sense of beauty. In the middle of the buildings, there was a pure white oval dome, which was the tallest in sight. The design was like the stars surrounding the moon, and it was shining brightly. Holy Light City did not have the slightest luxury or delicacy. There was only a kind of heavy precipitation that came pressing down on his face. Not only was there a vicissitude of history, but there was also an indescribable sense of sacredness, which made people kneel and worship. After being stunned for a long time, Tang En came back to his senses. Even though he had always had a bad impression of the Temple of Light, he could not help but curl his lips and say to himself, "It looks good." Although it was Twain's first time here, he had done his homework well before. He knew that the oval dome was the Real Northern Temple headquarters, and it had been nearly 1,000 years since it was built. As for the surrounding buildings, there were believers of the temple who came here later and voluntarily settled down. Over time, it formed the present Holy Light City. It was worth mentioning that Holy Light City did not have a city gate or wall. In other words, one could enter the city from any direction. This design probably meant that it was open and above board. All living things were equal, and it did not reject any believer. Not long after they entered the city, Tang En and the others had to get down from the carriage and walk. This wasn't because there were any rules, but because the buildings in the city were too densely packed, squeezing the space on the roads, making it impossible for carriages to pass freely. There are also various shops on both sides of the road, but there didn't seem to be a specialized commercial area. They were mixed in with the houses, and one could only barely recognize them by looking at their signboards. As Tang En walked among them, he turned his head and looked around. All he could see were similar peaceful faces. Most of them were dressed in long robes, and there was no trace of nervousness or anxiety on them. There was no sense of fame or fortune. Even the cat and dog sleeping in front of the door were squinting their eyes towards the sun, their expressions lazy and satisfied. Everything seemed so peaceful and calm. After walking for about 5 minutes, a gentle slope gradually appeared on the road. At this moment, suddenly, clang, clang, clang. The sound of a bell resounded from afar, and it was melodious and mellow. When one heard it, one couldn't help but think of an old and mottled green bell. Pausing his steps, Tang En glanced around and found that everyone had put down what they were doing at the same time. They stopped and stood quietly in one direction with their eyes closed and one hand on their heart. Their expressions were infinitely relaxed and peaceful. The whole street was quiet at this time. Only the distant sound of the bell could be heard, which rang every few seconds. A layer of gauze-like solemn atmosphere gently pressed down, not stained by dust or smoke. Unexpectedly, Tang also couldn't help but close his eyes. His brows furrowed slightly at first, and then gradually smoothed out. The bell rang a total of 9 times, about a minute from start to finish. After the sound of the bell, the noise of the rustling started again. Those who should be walking walked, and those who should be talking talked. Everything returned to normal. Phew! After letting out a long breath, Tang slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was somewhat aghast. Damn, is this the power of faith? I was almost brainwashed by purification. Of course, this was not just the power of faith. Humans were social animals. As long as they were still in the world, they would inevitably be affected by the surrounding environment, the emotions of the people around them, and so on. The only difference was the degree of influence. And this was Holy Light City, the gathering place of all the strong believers. If one stayed here for too long, it was almost inevitable that they would be affected or even assimilated. At this moment, Tang began to understand Sylvia's way of thinking and style of doing things. Anyone who grew up in such an environment would be like this. President. President? Oh. Under the repeated calls of an old man, Tang came back to his senses and shrugged. Sorry, I thought of something and got distracted. Let's continue. It's okay. The old man shook his head and sighed with understanding. Actually, every time I come here, I also feel a little bit. I feel that I'm too dirty and I don't fit in here. Tang chuckled. Hee, we are indeed dirty, but that's because we often wipe the dust on the surface of the light. Someone has to do that, right? The old man was stunned when he heard this, and then his face was full of admiration. President's insight is thorough. I admire you. That's nothing. Don't forget, I'm a great philanthropist to Shanghai City. They chatted like this for about half an hour. During this time, they passed through countless streets and finally arrived at the bottom of the Oval Vault. The real headquarters of the Northern Temple looked like a palace from the outside. Of course, it was not the luxurious kind, but an ancient building that coexisted with grandeur and history. After arriving here, Tang purposely fell a step behind and watched as the two elders walked around the main hall with great familiarity. It seemed that they were going to enter from the back of the temple. From this, it could be seen that the Bounty Hunter Guild had always been a puppet in the eyes of some big shots of the brilliant shrine. They could order it around whenever they needed it and abandon it when they didn't. At the side door at the back of the temple, the few Knights of Light guarding there seemed to be familiar with them. After the old man explained his purpose, a Knight of Light nodded and went inside to report. After waiting for a few minutes, Tang raised his eyebrows and felt that the atmosphere around him was a little strange. After observing for a while, he found that the Knights of Light, who were quite enthusiastic before, had an ugly expression on their faces. Their gazes were very unfriendly. The two old men were a little timid and looked at him from time to time, as if they were a little confused. What's going on? Just as Tang was puzzled, the Knight of Light who went in to report brought a middle-aged clergyman in a white robe with an indifferent expression. Glancing at them, the middle-aged clergyman waved his hand and said in an impatient tone, "Come with me." After saying that, he turned and left. Tang and the others naturally did not dare to delay and hurriedly passed through the side door. When they passed by the Knights of Light, they could clearly hear a few dissatisfied snorts. More than 10 steps away from the side door, Tang's sleeve was gently pulled. He turned around and saw the old man with a puzzled expression. He asked in a low voice, "President, why didn't you give some money to those knights this time? If we offend them, we'll have a hard time the next time we come." Damn, why didn't you say so earlier? Tang's mouth twitched a few times when he heard that. He suddenly understood. Previously, under Harry's interrogation methods, Zachary was indeed very cooperative and answered whatever he was asked without hiding anything. but some inconspicuous small things, such as coming here to ask for filial piety and so on, not to mention Tang In, even Zachary himself would not remember it. Ahem, I was a little worried just now. Well, I was distracted. This is my mistake. We'll make up for it later when we come out. The old man suddenly understood. He thought that Zachary was worried about whether he could successfully withstand the wrath of the temple. So he was distracted and made a mistake. At this time, Tang In finally understood. He touched his nose, walked a few steps quickly, and came to the middle-aged clergyman's side. He said politely, "Sir, please pass the message back and forth. This is a small gift. I hope you don't mind." With a flick of his sleeve, a few large gold notes were stuffed into the clergyman's palm under his robe. Stopping, the middle-aged clergyman turned his head and looked at him. His indifferent expression was greatly eased in an instant. He smiled and nodded, seemingly satisfied. Seeing this, Tang In returned a humble smile and sighed softly. The strange feeling of restraint in his heart because of what he had seen and heard since entering the city disappeared instantly. Damn, assimilation of faith, brainwashing, purification. They are all weak. Sure enough, the human heart is the way of the king. Greed is the way to go. Chapter 770. As it turned out, although light was dazzling, it was the shiny gold coins that could truly move people's hearts. After the filial gesture, the middle-aged clergyman's attitude instantly changed. He politely invited Tang In and the others into a side hall, served them tea, and politely told them not to move around as he needed to seek instructions from his superiors. Tang In nodded with a smile, watching the middle-aged clergyman leave through the door. Only then did he shake his head with a smile, beckoning the other two elders to return to their seats. He couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Gold coins were indeed a good thing. What are you? You're just a snob. The small side hall only had Tang In and the other two, so one of the elders instantly put away his previous respectful expression and curled his lips in disdain. The other elder nodded in agreement, revealing a look of disdain as he sneered, without us, these parasites can only go hungry." This was the truth. Tang In also understood after the reminder just now. After all, Holy Light City was different from other places. Although the clergymen here seemed to have a much higher status than the clergymen in the churches outside on the surface. But in reality, the opportunity to reach out and fish for benefits was extremely rare. After all, there were many believers here, and there were many eyes. Even if it was a big shot with a lofty status, for the sake of influence, they would not dare to do some excessive things casually. Not to mention the low-ranking middle-aged clergymen, the Knights of Light guarding the door, and the other small fries. It was precisely because of this that after knowing that Tang In and the others had arrived, these people deliberately put on an enthusiastic or arrogant look, waiting for Tang Un and the others to take the initiative to show filial piety. The general idea was that they wanted both money and face. After understanding this situation, Tang In touched the thick bundles of gold notes in his arms and couldn't help but feel more confident about the situation he was about to face. As long as there was a desire, it was easy to handle. Problems that could be solved with money were not problems at all. But then, Tang In and the others waited in this quiet side hall for a long time. It was not until noon that the door was finally pushed open when hunger appeared in their stomachs. The newcomer was an old man with a head full of white hair and sunken eyes. He wore a dark red robe with intricate patterns on his collar. Upon seeing this, Tang In and the other two immediately stood up and bowed respectfully. "Greetings, Lord Byron." Byron, a cardinal, one of the top leaders of the Northern Temple. With an expressionless face, Byron acted as if he didn't see Tang In and the others. With a gloomy expression, he walked straight to the seat of honor in the side hall and sat down. The situation is not good. Tang In exchanged glances with the other two senior elders and pretended to be terrified. They did not dare to raise their bent waists. Silence, silence. Faint light shone through the colored crystal glass, sprinkling the floor with colored glass. There was a faint noise coming from outside the house, which gradually faded away. After an unknown period of time, a cold snort finally broke the silence in the side hall when the two elders' legs were trembling from bending over for a long time. "Oomph, look at what you've done." As soon as he finished speaking, a piece of paper floated down from above and landed in front of Tang, In, and the others. Tang, In bent over and picked it up. After glancing at it, he couldn't help but raise his eyebrows. On the paper, it was written about the complete annihilation of the temple's elite team. Tang In originally thought that the temple would not know about this matter so quickly, but unexpectedly, they had already received the news. But when he looked at the signature of Owens, Tang In suddenly understood. Bang, bang. Seeing this, the two elders' legs went soft and their faces turned pale. They immediately knelt on the ground. "Damn, can't you be a little more reserved?" Tang In cursed inwardly. He helplessly knelt on one knee and forced himself to break out in cold sweat. He hurriedly said, "Lord, please listen to our explanation. There's something else behind this matter." Explanation. Byron narrowed his muddy old eyes, his face cold. "A Holy Knight commander, 5 Templar high priests, more than 10 senior light mages, hundreds of holy knights. You still have the face to ask me for an explanation? Why don't you just die?" Bang, he heavily slapped the chair and waved his hand, shooting 3 light arrows towards Tang In and the other 2. Bang, bang, bang. Tang In and the others naturally didn't dare to dodge. Their chests tightened, and they spat out a mouthful of blood, rolling to the threshold of the side hall. Fortunately, this young master was already prepared. While rolling, Tang In pressed on his chest, and the water bag filled with blood immediately burst. The clothes on his chest were instantly soaked in blood, looking incomparably miserable. It couldn't be helped. Tang In's abnormal physique was there for all to see. No matter how strong Byron was, as long as he didn't go for the kill, an attack of this level wouldn't be able to hurt him. Of course, on the surface, he still put on a dying appearance and complained bitterly. "Cough, cough. Lord, cough, cough. Please listen to our explanation. If you are still dissatisfied, it won't be too late to kill us at that time. Lord." Byron's face sank, and he didn't say a word. Tang In only took it as a tacit agreement, and quickly told him that the brown-clothed old man was a traitor. It must be known that although Zachary's identity was the head of the Bounty Hunter Guild, he was just a puppet. His actual authority only covered the matters of the branch guilds. The appointment and dismissal of people like the brown-clothed old man were matters that only the higher-ups of the Temple of Light could decide. Therefore, now that Tang In and the others insisted that the brown-clothed old man was a traitor, the destruction of the reinforcement team couldn't be blamed on them, but on a certain higher-up of the Temple of Light. Moreover, from Zachary's mouth, Tang In also knew the general situation inside the Temple of Light. It wasn't as united and friendly as it seemed on the surface. On the contrary, the internal strife between them was extremely intense. The person standing behind the brown-clothed old man wasn't Byron, but another big shot of the Temple of Light. In fact, Byron and the person behind Zachary had some relationship. This should also be the reason why he only gave a light punishment just now and didn't directly shout to kill. Sure enough, although Byron's expression was still gloomy, when he heard that the brown-clothed old man was a traitor, his eyes flickered a few times, and he seemed to be somewhat moved. Seeing this, Tang In was overjoyed. There was a chance. He hurriedly struck while the iron was hot and continued. "It's all because of this despicable villain that more than half of the guild's colleagues were killed and injured, and caused the misfortune of the lords. From the beginning to the end, we didn't even have time to see the lords who came as reinforcements. Now that the despicable villain has been executed, we found a few letters on his body that haven't been sent out. He actually wanted to kill us all. My lord, now his corpse and the evidence of the letters are outside the Temple of Light. If you don't believe me, you can send someone to investigate. These words are naturally false, but after the brown-clothed old man was killed by Tang In, this matter was already set in stone. As for the evidence of the letters, it was made by the joint efforts of Tang In and the other 2 elders. At this time, it wasn't important to make a false accusation. The important thing was how to find someone to take the blame and how to save their own lives. The two elders were able to get to their current positions, so naturally, they were also experienced people. After Tang In started, they immediately gathered their courage and cried out for injustice. Tears flowed down their old faces, which was really pitiful. "Shut up!" A stern shout echoed in the hall. Byron narrowed his old eyes, and a cold light flickered. Just this. When the two elders heard this, their bodies trembled. They only thought that Byron had the intention to kill, and their faces immediately turned ashen. However, when Tang In heard this non-committal tone, his heart was moved, and he hurriedly said, "Of course not, sir. I still have some evidence here." As soon as he finished speaking, he staggered to his feet and ran all the way to Byron's side, blocking the view of the two old men below. He then reached into his bosom and took out two thick bundles of blood-stained gold notes. Then he moved his palm, and the gold notes symbolized the highest amount of 10,000 gold notes facing Byron. It was extremely conspicuous. Tang was also taking a gamble. Byron's position was high and powerful, and it seemed that he didn't need to care about worldly possessions like money. But as mentioned earlier, this was Holy Light City, and there were too few opportunities to make a profit. Moreover, the profits earned by the Bounty Hunter Guild every quarter were directly handed over to the temple headquarters, and not to Holy Light City. Of course, this quarter's profits were now in Tang In's hands, and he had also swallowed them without hesitation. No matter what, this money would never go through Byron's hands. Therefore, as long as Byron was greedy, he shouldn't refuse the temptation of at least 2 million gold notes, even if it was stained with blood. At this moment, the side chamber once again fell into silence. 1 second, 2 seconds. Tang In's lowered gaze gradually turned cold, and his long and narrow eyes slightly narrowed. This time, he had come to find evidence, so he naturally couldn't let Byron deal with this matter. Therefore, if his plan didn't work out, Tang In would instantly take action and kill Byron in front of him. 3 seconds, for seconds, the dagger slipped out of his sleeve. The distance between the two was really too close, only a few steps apart. Within this range, Tang In had the confidence to kill anyone. 5 seconds. The red robe suddenly waved in front of his eyes, and Tang In only felt his hand lighten. He clenched his fist in the air, and the two thick bundles of gold notes had already disappeared. Cough, cough. Byron coughed a few times, deeply looking at Tang In and nodding slightly. Since there is indeed a hidden story behind this matter, I will need to carefully consider it. And you can go back first. Pause for a while. He straightened his robe. Don't worry. The temple will not wrongly accuse any innocent person. So particular about people, Tang In inwardly sighed with emotion and nodded in understanding, bowing, "Thank you, sir." The two old men below saw that the situation had instantly taken a turn for the better and couldn't help but be overjoyed. They crawled up and bowed again and again. "Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir." In the midst of their ecstasy, they couldn't help but wonder what Zachary had done just now to actually change Byron's mind in just a few short seconds. However, no matter how much they racked their brains, they would never have thought that Zachary would be so bold as to take the profits of the guild and then generously give them away. One must know that this was also a matter of losing one's head. Of course, since it wasn't his money, Tang In wouldn't care, just as the atmosphere in the side chamber instantly eased, and after a few words of conversation, Tang In and the others tactfully said their goodbyes. Suddenly, a burst of urgent shouting came from outside the hall. "Ooh, sir is meeting with an important guest. Knight Sylvia, you can't enter. You can't enter. Sir. Chapter 771. Sir is meeting important guests. At night, Sylvia, you can't go in, you can't go in. Sir, stop her. Get lost." Boom. The thick wooden door of the side hall was blasted open. Countless pieces of wood flew in all directions, and the walls on both sides exploded at the same time. The two elders who were close to them were caught off guard and were instantly hit. They screamed and rolled on the ground while covering their bloody faces. Then, bang, a few figures flew in from outside the door. They slid along the flat floor of the side hall until they reached the feet of Tang, In, and Byron. There was an ear-piercing sound of friction, and they finally hit the stairs and stopped abruptly. Tang In blinked and looked at the Knights of Light, who were obviously not sober. He looked to the side and found the middle-aged clergyman from before. He could not help but lick his dry lips and looked up. Byron. "Sir." The voice was low and hoarse. Then, a figure holding a long spear appeared at the door. It was a little dazzling in the sunlight, and his face could not be seen clearly. Stepping into the side hall, the light dimmed and dimmed. Only then did he see a face that looked like it was carved out of ice and frost. Her eyes were still like an ancient well. It was familiar, yet unfamiliar. Familiar because this face belonged to Sylvia. Tang In had seen it many times and even kissed it once. Unfamiliar because this face did not have the familiar determination and valiance. Instead, there was a rare decadence, confusion, and anger. Their eyes met. Stepping into the side hall, Sylvia narrowed her eyes, and a dangerous light flashed in them. "You are not dead. You are actually here." Tang In felt the cold, murderous intent and suddenly shivered. He immediately hid behind Byron. "Head Knight Sylvia, what are you doing?" Looking at his subordinates scattered on the ground, Byron's face suddenly sank. He opened his mouth to reprimand. But before he could finish his words, whoosh, bang, a sackcloth bag fell to the center of the side hall. It shook the ground and spread out. Inside were scattered fragments of armor and some charred cloth. Sylvia took a step forward, lowered her head, and muttered to herself, "This is a fragment of a paladin's armor. This is a fragment of a paladin's armor. This is a fragment of a paladin's armor. This is a fragment of a paladin's robe. If I'm not mistaken, it's from the Templar." At this time, another person came in. It was Owens, who looked a little helpless. He looked at Sylvia and then looked at Tang and behind Byron. He couldn't help but sigh. Owens had secretly sent back the news of the elite team's annihilation so that the Temple of Light could be prepared. He did not expect to run into it now. Sylvia raised her head and looked straight at Byron with her knife-like eyes. She said in a deep voice, "Sir, please explain why they would appear in such a small and unremarkable farm." And she raised her spear slightly and pointed it at Tang In behind Byron. "His name is Zachary. Someone told me that he is the person in charge of the north of the Bounty Hunter Guild. The reason why the reinforcement team went to the small farm was to protect him." "My lord, why did all of this happen?" After she finished speaking, the hall fell into a dead silence. It had to be said that Sylvia's timing was too coincidental. She had caught Tang Un and the rest in the side hall. In this way, even if they wanted to deny it, they could not do it. Byron frowned, his eyes hazy. Sylvia's sudden intrusion was undoubtedly beyond his expectations. After a moment, he said in a deep voice, "Head Knight Sylvia, this is not something you should care about." Although there was no direct answer, this sentence undoubtedly implied something. "So it's true," Sylvia murmured in a low voice. The light in her eyes dimmed in an instant. It was as if her spine had been pulled out and her heroic spirit was gone. Fake miracles, the corruption of the clergy, collusion with the Bounty Hunter Guild. "So, all of this is true." Owen saw this and shook his head slightly. Of course, he knew why Sylvia had such a strong reaction. In fact, this was not caused by one thing, but by a series of major blows. Ever since they returned from the northern wilderness, Owens had found that Sylvia's state was a little off. It was also because of this that he invited Sylvia to watch the miracles and relax. But the result was the opposite. The miracles were exposed on the spot, and Sylvia also suffered a heavy blow because of it. Then, the ugly deeds of the clergy were exposed one after another. This made Sylvia burn with anger, and her emotions fluctuated greatly. Later, they received an order from the temple to protect the great philanthropist Zachary. Originally, Owens was relieved because at least for a short period of time, Sylvia did not have to see these things again. But who would have thought that this time, It would directly lead to a shocking scandal of the temple and the bounty hunter guild colluding with each other. These repeated blows, let alone Sylvia, who had a pure faith, even Owens, who vaguely knew about the dark side of the temple, was a little overwhelmed. Damn it, this was the rhythm of forcing good people to the road of no return. Seeing Sylvia so sad, Byron simply opened up and advised, "Head Knight Sylvia, in fact, these things should not have been known to you. You're a martial arts genius of the temple that is hard to come by in 100 years, and your faith in the Father is also extremely firm. You only need to focus on increasing your cultivation and eradicate the evil heretics." Pause for a while, he continued, "But now that you already know, I can't hide it from you. That's right, the Bounty Hunter Guild is indeed an organization secretly set up by the temple. This decision was approved by the Pope and the bishops as early as a few hundred years ago. As for the reason and purpose, it is very simple. Just as the Code of the Holy Knights says, purify the evil and restore the light. So you don't have to be so discouraged. Everyone's goal is the same, to fight against the evil forces. The only difference is that there are some differences in the way we do things. This, I hope you can understand. TSK, what a good reason for patiently persuading and speaking righteously. Hiding behind Byron, Tangen could not help but smack his lips when he heard what Byron said, secretly expressing his admiration. He had to admit that Byron's words were very reasonable at first. The general meaning was that regardless of whether it was a black cat or a white cat, catching the mouse was the way of the king. However, Tangen immediately shook his head slightly. His expression was very disapproving. He did not dare to say it for others, but he understood Sylvia. How could these words easily change her mindset? Don't joke around. Sure enough, Sylvia came back to her senses. Pursing her lips, she softly said, "Sir, do you still remember the first sentence of the temple's doctrine? Of course, all believers must worship the Father God as their only Lord, advocate the light, and love the world. Then, for the sake of purifying the evil, is the light still light?" Byron was stunned. He opened his mouth, wanting to say something, but in the end, he did not say anything. Tangen sighed with emotion. Well, this is the familiar Sylvia, the big-breasted but brainless Sylvia. Well, now I admire you a little. Putting the gun behind her back, Sylvia took a step forward. Her eyes were still downcast. Then, for the clergy who have been tainted with the evil light, will they still love the world? Taking another step forward, her spirit gradually rose. Then, for those who have been tainted with the evil light and have lost their hearts of love, do you still have the qualifications to worship the Father God as your Lord? Owen saw that the atmosphere was not right, so he quickly rushed into the side chamber. At this time, Sylvia had already raised the gun in her hand. She suddenly raised her head, her eyes filled with stubbornness. Let me tell you, light can only be light forever. Evil. Whoosh whoosh, the tyrannical spear light instantly lit up, quickly breaking through the air. Owens's footsteps paused. He originally wanted to stand between Sylvia and Byron, to prevent the two from clashing and producing unimaginable consequences. But he did not expect that these two spear lights were shot to the left and right respectively. Can only be destroyed forever. Boom, boom, with a cold shout, a strong wind wave crazily swirled in the side chamber. Gravel and wood dregs flew everywhere, instantly shattering all the colored crystal glass around. And at the place where the explosion occurred, the two elders who came with Tangen had already completely disappeared. Xiao Weian pulled back her spear and raised it up high again. Her eyes were fixed on Byron's back. Her eyes were slightly red, and there were tears in them. Since I'm the most foolish one, then let me continue to be foolish. Stepping forward, the spear fell. Chapter 772. Sir, save me. After the two elders were annihilated by the spear, Tangen realized that the situation wasn't good. Damn, Sylvia seemed to have been provoked a little too much. She decisively shrank behind Byron and shouted loudly for help. Sure enough, in the next moment, Sylvia's eyes turned red. She waved her spear with an extremely stubborn expression and rushed over. Stop! Although he could see that Sylvia wasn't coming for him, Byron, who felt that his authority was being challenged, flew into a rage. He clasped his hands together, and his dark red robe fluttered without wind. A circular shield of light instantly condensed in the air. The mysterious characters on the shield revolved unceasingly, holy and solid, separating the two. However, the rapidly charging Sylvia suddenly took a step forward, and the side hall suddenly trembled. The blazing flames on the spear body instantly rose sharply and swayed. Soon after, it condensed at the tip of the spear and pointed it out calmly. Great! Buzz! When the spear tip and the shield of light collided, it didn't explode with a loud bang. Instead, it was a rather strange loud sound, as if a cloth bag filled with air had been pierced in an instant. Immediately, ripples visible to the naked eye suddenly vibrated in the air. With a crash, all the chairs and decorations in the side hall were instantly shattered into pieces and turned into dregs. Immediately after, the air waves revolved upwards and the wind swept away the clouds. Bang! The sky brightened up and the roof above was actually directly broken open by this attack. Countless pieces of wood and stone scattered in all directions, causing everyone in the surroundings to be dumbfounded. In the side hall, the shield of light that had just condensed had already been shattered into several pieces. It was clear that it had been completely destroyed. This result was inevitable. In a situation where the distance was very close, a dochi martial artist would have a certain advantage over a magician. Moreover, this was Sylvia. As the remaining power of the ripple spread, Byron couldn't help but take a few steps back. Bang! He directly hit the back wall. Ah, sir, are you all right? Tang Yin, who had dodged first, came over again. He had a frightened expression and pretended to be concerned. He angrily pushed away Tang on supporting arm and struggled to get up. Sylvia, you good. Byron roared furiously. His old face was flushed red, and his body was trembling nonstop. It was obvious that he was very angry. At this moment, a spear light suddenly flashed out from the dust wave, swiftly striking towards Tang Un's exposed figure. F*CK. Tang and cursed inwardly. His body instantly tensed up, but he still resisted his instinct to dodge and stared at the incoming spear. Because Byron was at the side, Sylvia's spear light wasn't too fierce in order to avoid accidental injuries. Therefore, as long as Tang In wanted to avoid it, even if the spear light touched his clothes, he would have the opportunity to avoid it in the blink of an eye. Therefore, Tang In chose to stand in place and wait for Byron's reaction. Of course, his concentrated look in the eyes of others was that he was scared silly. You dare! Sure enough, just as Tang In expected, Byron saw that Sylvia still wanted to kill Zachary. He couldn't help but fly into a rage. He reached out to grab Tang In's shoulder and quickly left the place. Boom! A wave of air rolled. The seat of honor and the back wall were directly shattered by the spear light. The remaining 4 walls of the side hall suddenly trembled, as if they were about to collapse. Byron rolled awkwardly and protected Tang In behind him. He angrily roared, Sylvia, I will protect him today. If you want to kill him, you have to go through me first. There was no doubt that these words carried a lot of weight and were powerful and resonant. However, while Tang In put on a grateful face, he was madly ridiculing in his heart. Damn, you're the one who took my money. Can't you speak a little more firmly? What do you mean by go through me? Can't you be a little more domineering? Instead of stepping over my dead body, kill me first if you have the guts. Let's not talk about Tang In's mentality of taking advantage of Byron's words first. Sylvia acted as if she didn't hear Byron's words. She put away her spear and expressionlessly took another step forward. Sir, move aside. Before she finished speaking, whoosh, a man in a spear instantly cut in and blocked in front of Sylvia. Her footsteps paused, and she pursed her lips. You also want to block me? No, but Owen scratched his head and spread his hands. He helplessly sighed. It's about time. Let's stop here. Shaking her head, Sylvia lowered her eyes and said softly, "Move aside, Owens. You can't block me. This is something that everyone knows. You don't have to be so frank. It's very embarrassing. I'm sorry." Owens raised his spear slightly and used practical actions to express his attitude. Owens naturally couldn't block Sylvia. He knew this very well, but he had no other choice now. Injuring a clergyman, killing a high-ranking member of the Bounty Hunter Guild, and so on were all small matters that didn't matter much. However, if she came into conflict with Bishop Byron, or even beat him to a pulp, then this matter would blow up and the consequences would be unthinkable. At this moment, the sound of footsteps could be heard near and far, and figures swayed. The clergymen in the surroundings had naturally seen such a big commotion in the side hall just now and were naturally rushing over. After a few breaths of silence, Sylvia slowly raised her head. Her gaze swept past the somewhat nervous Owens and the furious Byron, and finally settled on Tang Yin. She paused, and a few traces of doubt flashed in her eyes. "Damn, I'm already in this state, and you can still recognize me?" Seeing that Sylvia seemed to have sensed something, Tang Yin immediately broke out in cold sweat. He put on a frightened expression and subconsciously avoided her gaze, timidly moving closer to Byron. Tang Yin's disguise this time could be said to be perfect. It was undoubtedly impossible for Sylvia to see through it at a glance. However, perhaps it was because of a woman's messy intuition, but Sylvia still felt that there was something wrong with this Zachary. Of course, this feeling was very faint. Coupled with the fact that her emotions were in an abnormally chaotic state, she didn't think too much about it. Taking a deep look at Tang Yin, Sylvia pursed her lips as if she was forcibly restraining something. She turned around and put away her spear. "I hope you can always protect him." With that, she directly stepped out of the dilapidated side hall. Phew! Seeing this, Owens couldn't help but let out a long sigh of relief. He put down his spear and wiped the cold sweat from his forehead. Immediately after, he turned around and gave a simple salute to Byron, and then quickly chased after Sylvia while waving his hands at the clergy who had rushed over. It's fine. Go back and do what you need to do. It's just a misunderstanding. The clergy who had rushed over looked at the murderous Sylvia leaving, and then looked at the battered side hall. They couldn't help but gulp, their expression strange. "My lord." In the side hall, Tang Yin glanced at Byron, whose face was as gloomy as water, and asked hesitantly. There was no doubt that Byron's current mood was beyond furious. However, perhaps because he had taken advantage of Tang Yin, he didn't get angry at him. He only waved his hand gloomily. "You go back first." But Head Knight Sylvia Tang Yin put on a look of lingering fear, and his footsteps moved slightly, unwilling to leave. Tang Yin didn't think that Sylvia's last threatening words were just empty words. Tang Yin dared to be sure that as long as he dared to leave the temple headquarters, Sylvia would immediately chase after him. Of course, Tang Yin wasn't worried that Sylvia would go crazy. After all, his current strength wasn't what it used to be. However, if Sylvia was really determined to chase after him, then it would indeed be a big problem, and it would affect his plans for coming here. Byron frowned when he heard this. Apparently, he had also thought of Sylvia's problem, although he snorted coldly and was extremely furious. In the end, he still didn't dare to underestimate Sylvia's determination. He muttered to himself and waved his hand to summon a knight, instructing him to bring Tang into a safe place somewhere in the temple. Tang Yin was overjoyed when he heard this. He didn't expect that after Sylvia's trouble, he would actually benefit from the disaster and successfully live in the temple. This undoubtedly provided a great convenience for him to steal the records and evidence. After repeatedly thanking him, Tang Yin simply left with the Night of Light. When he passed by the two big pits, which were the places where the elders who came with him died, he couldn't help but shake his head. Well, now he didn't even need to collect the corpses. Seeing Tang Yin's figure disappear, Byron stood in the same place. His face was gloomy and uncertain. Finally, he narrowed his eyes, and a trace of coldness flashed through them, as if he had decided on something. He turned his head and angrily glared, Why are you still lying there, still not getting up?" The middle-aged clergyman at the bottom of the steps looked embarrassed. He patted the dust off his robe and climbed up from the ground. After all, he was a clergyman, so Sylvia naturally couldn't kill him. Of course, looking at Sylvia's crazy appearance, he also didn't dare to stand up. He impatiently waved his hand. "Go and invite the several bishops who are still in the temple. Tell them that I have something important to discuss with them." As soon as his voice fell, Byron's line of sight flashed. He subconsciously raised his head and saw that the four walls of the side hall were collectively shaking, like drunkards. The next moment, a shadow overturned and simply pressed down. Boom! 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 Chapter 773. Where are you from, little brother? Your Excellency, my hometown is Wali Town. Well, it's an inconspicuous town, a few hundred miles away from here. Wali Town? What a coincidence. My name also has the word Li in it. It seems that we hit it off very well. Well, no wonder I felt a sense of familiarity when I saw you just now. Ah, Your Excellency. Don't be so formal, just call me Zachary. Or Master Zachary. It sounds more familiar. Well, who else is in your family? Not far from the side hall, Tang and briefly observed the young knight who led the way, and then began to chat with him with a very friendly attitude. The young knight obviously couldn't stand this kind of friendliness, and replied with some restraint, "Master Zachary. Master Zachary, I have a younger sister and an old mother at home. Then their life must be very difficult, right? Oh, sorry, I'm a bit straightforward. If I didn't mean to hurt you, I apologize in advance." "Oh, it's okay. The young knight quickly stopped Tangen's apology and rubbed his hands. "In fact, it's okay. After I became a Divinity Temple Knight, I receive money every month. Although it's not much, I basically don't need to spend anything here, and it's enough for my mother and sister to use." It had to be said that in this world where royalty and theocracy were supreme, the gap between the wealth of ordinary civilians and nobles was quite large. It was precisely because of this that if any civilian family had a child with a good talent for martial arts, they would generally choose to send him to the Divinity Temple. This way, the burden of the family could be reduced, and second, it was also an opportunity. As long as the child could pass the training, assessment, and finally become a qualified Divinity Temple Knight, then, like this young knight, he could receive a salary to improve the family's economic situation. It was worth mentioning that if any child was found to have the constitution of a mage, it basically meant that he would have a meteoric rise. Of course, the probability was very low, unless there was smoke rising from the ancestral grave. This was not a joke. Although there was no factual basis, most children who awakened the talent of mage would have a mage ancestor if they traced back to 8 generations. "Oh, I see." Tang and nodded and sighed. "That's still very hard. I heard that ordinary knights don't receive much money every month. Actually, it's quite a lot." Waving his hand to interrupt the young knight's rebuttal, Tang changed the topic and wiped the corner of his eyes. His voice was a little sad. "To tell you the truth, your Master Zach's family was also very poor when I was young. What left the deepest impression on me was that every time I wanted to spend a copper coin, I would first guess the pros and cons. Oh, why? Spending the money on the front and not spending the money on the back. Hiss. I'm sorry, I forgot myself." Rubbing his eyes, Tang raised his head and took a deep breath. Then, he lowered his head and grabbed the young knight's shoulder. From then on, I couldn't bear to see anyone suffer. He pulled out a gold note with a value of 1,000 and stuffed it into the young knight's hand. "This is for you. Is it enough? Let me know if it's not enough." No. After seeing clearly that there was 1,000 gold note in his hand, the young knight hurriedly waved his hand as if he was holding a piece of burning charcoal, wanting to return the gold note. "I can't take it, Master Carey. I can't take this money. The temple has a rule that the clergy cannot accept gifts from believers. Take it. Listen to me first." Twisting his wrist, Tangen's expression was firm. "Master Carey, I don't lack money. My nickname as the great philanthropist of Shanghai City isn't just for show. Every minute, I can make tens of thousands of transactions. This 1,000 gold is just a matter of a few meals for me. But this is different for you. Think about your old mother. Think about your growing sister. When a young knight heard this, his body shook and his arm froze. Tang In continued, "Don't tell me you don't want to hire a doctor for your old mother to do a full body check? Don't you want to buy the best clothes for her, the best food? Don't you want her to not have to think about the tight spending every day when she doesn't have much time left? Also, don't you want her to be able to buy a piece of meat for half a day? Think about your sister. She has to get married. Don't you want her to buy a beautiful set of clothes? A decent dowry?" The young knight was stunned. "But my sister is only 8 years old." Cough, cough. That's not the main point. She has to get married, right? Closing the young knight's hand that was holding the 1,000 gold note, Tang In clapped and released it. The corner of his mouth rose. "Don't think too much. You have to know that it's because of the existence of you Knights of Light that the evil people in the world don't dare to do anything. You have paid with your blood and even your life for this, so you should take this money. We should take it." The young knight was a little absent-minded. The veins on his hand that was holding the gold note were bulging. It had to be said that sometimes, no matter good or bad, as long as there was a reason that could convince oneself, then it would be okay to do it. "Yes." Tang In strengthened his tone and replied affirmatively. In his heart, he secretly smacked his lips. Was his behavior considered as the devil's temptation? TSK. It seems like I'm not a good person. Slightly shaking his head, he instantly swept away the distracting thoughts in his mind. Tang In smiled and said, "If you still feel uncomfortable in your heart, then help me out. We'll make an equivalent exchange. This way, you should feel much better." "In? What is it, Master Klee?" The young knight was a little tempted and a little vigilant. In fact, it's very simple." Tang In stretched out his arm and pointed around. "Your Master Klee is a believer, but I'm ashamed that I haven't come here many times. Now that I finally have free time to come here, I want to walk around and find someone to introduce the temple to me. This will fulfill my dream of coming here." "That's it." The young knight suddenly breathed a sigh of relief. He was completely relieved. He bowed and said, "As long as you don't think I'm stupid, I'm willing to walk around with you and introduce the temple to you." It's done. Tang In's purpose here was to steal the record evidence. But now that he had just arrived, he naturally had no clue about the hiding place. If there was a familiar person to introduce him, it would undoubtedly help him quickly locate the target range. He laughed and shook his head. Of course not. I like honest people. Let's go. I can't wait any longer." "As you wish, Master Klee." Just as Tang had succeeded in deceiving the honest man, in a sealed secret room somewhere in the temple, a small meeting between the upper echelons of the Northern Temple, initiated by Byron, had officially begun. This problem must be solved, and Sylvia must be punished. At the beginning of the meeting, Byron, who had a bloody cloth wrapped around his head, was the first to set the tone. He was furious. What right does she have to injure my people? What right does she have to kill the upper echelons of the Bounty Hunter Guild? Moreover, she wants to kill me. Everyone, she wants to kill me today. Bishop Byron, calm down. Please control your emotions." An old man with a 1-foot-long white beard, who was also dressed in a dark red robe, said helplessly, "I can't calm down. You didn't see her today. She's so arrogant. If there weren't people watching, she would really dare to kill me today." "Bishop Byron, this is too much of an exaggeration. How could she possibly kill you?" Pausing for a moment, the white-bearded elder rubbed the space between his eyebrows. "Moreover, she only killed 2 people from the Bounty Hunter Guild today. Not to mention that we don't have enough power to put pressure on the Knights Department. Even if we did, with her past achievements, no one would do anything to her." Byron was furious when he heard this. "What do you mean? Do I have to be killed for her to get the punishment she deserves?" The secret room was silent. The 5 or 6 bishops were silent. To a certain extent, this was a tacit agreement with Byron's words. "You said that Sylvia wanted to kill you, but you were standing here perfectly fine. The only part of your body that was injured was because you couldn't react in time, and your head was hit by the falling wall. How could anyone punish the meritorious Sylvia? This was ridiculous. Chapter 774. P.S. Sorry, it's a bit late. I wanted to post it together, but I realized that it wasn't the same content, so I split it up. The start of the secret meeting didn't go well. As Byron sat down with an ashen face, the issue of Sylvia's outburst was temporarily put aside. Of course, this was far from over. Holding his forehead, the white-bearded old man looked around and said, "Everyone, the situation is very troublesome. The matter of the Bounty Hunter Guild must not be exposed, but I don't need to say more about Sylvia's character. Everyone here knows it. Now that she knows about this matter." After a pause, he sighed and emphasized, "In short, it's a big problem." Hearing this, the few bishops lowered their eyes and didn't say a word. They were all experienced people, so how could they not know how troublesome this matter was? But just like the white-bearded old man's attitude, they were all concerned about Sylvia's outstanding contributions and reputation. Naturally, they weren't willing to express any opinions. After a moment of silence, Byron snorted and took the lead to break the deadlock. "Humph. What else is there to say? Sylvia can't be left alive." Hiss. Although everyone had thought of this possibility, hearing Byron say it so bluntly, they couldn't help but suck in a breath of cold air. Their expressions changed. This isn't a bit too much? Even if we don't consider Sylvia's contributions and reputation, she is still a holy head knight. Then what do you say we do? Slamming the table and standing up, Byron waved his hand angrily. "Explain? I've already explained before, but what happened? Why don't you try?" Hearing this, the few bishops didn't say anything. To explain to Sylvia that the Bounty Hunter Guild was righteous. Looking up at the bloody cloth on Byron's forehead, the corners of their mouths twitched. "All right, let's not make this kind of joke." Feeling the focus of their gazes, Byron's face suddenly darkened. Then he thought of something and sneered. "Like I said before, everyone knows what kind of person Sylvia is. If she exposes this matter, no, she will definitely take action against this matter. When the time comes and things get out of hand, and the news reaches the headquarters, you..." He pointed at the bishops one by one, and then at himself. "And me, who can bear this responsibility?" The atmosphere in the secret room suddenly changed. The few bishops frowned at the same time when they heard this. Their expressions were gloomy and uncertain. Although Byron's words were a bit alarmist, the truth was more or less the same. The pure and holy Temple of Light was actually in cahoots with the filthy Bounty Hunter Guild, and it was a holy head commander who leaked this information. If this huge scandal were to spread, everyone's heart skipped a beat. Regardless of how the believers would react, as the leaders of the Northern Temple, they would not be able to escape punishment from the headquarters. Thinking of this, the attitude of the bishops immediately changed, and the atmosphere of the meeting became lively for the first time. Bishop Byron is right. We must consider the attitude of the headquarters. Sigh, it's Sylvia after all. So what? The establishment of the Bounty Hunter Guild was approved by the previous generations of popes and has been in existence for hundreds of years. Compared to this, a holy head knight commander is nothing. That's right. Even if this matter were to be reported to the headquarters, the popes should understand our actions. Even if they were hesitant in their hearts, the bishops could not help but harden their hearts and express their agreement with Byron's attitude. Cough, cough. Byron glanced left and right. Hearing these words, the corners of his mouth could not help but curl up. It was obvious that everyone's attitude was within his expectations. He coughed a few times and said again, "Since no one has any objections, let's discuss the details." Who can defeat Sylvia? Byron's words changed at the last moment. He was clear in his heart that even if everyone agreed with his opinion, if he wanted to directly kill Sylvia, there were still many concerns. This could only be used as a last resort. The most important thing was to defeat and capture her alive. But even so, after Byron's suggestion, the secret room could not help but fall silent again. The bishops looked at each other with bitter expressions on their faces. Yes, who could defeat Sylvia? After a moment of silence, someone suggested, "How about Grand Mage Hebern? He's in the church now." "Hebern? I heard that he's about to reach the realm of Archmage. This strength is enough, but no. It's not like you don't know Hebern's temper. He's eccentric, and there aren't many people in the church who can communicate with him. But Sylvia is one of them. So not only can we not let him know about this, we also have to find a reason to send him away from the church." "That's true. What about Rayizer? He's also a holy head commander, and he's ranked higher than Sylvia." He laughed bitterly. He forget it. Although he and Sylvia have a fierce rivalry and don't have a good relationship, I heard that in a private contest, he lost to Sylvia." There's such a thing?" "Yes. Although it's just a rumor, with Rayizer's obstinate and self-opinionated personality, he hasn't come out to refute it. This rumor is most likely true. If it weren't for the fact that the official contest between the Holy Head Commanders is held once every 3 years, his ranking would have fallen behind Sylvia long ago." After a round of discussion, the bishops who could not think of a suitable candidate looked at each other and could not help but be dumbfounded. There were naturally many experts in the Temple of Light, and there were many in the Northern Church as well. However, there are not many people who could fulfill the harsh requirements of being in the church, being able to defeat Sylvia, not being disgusted by this matter, and not having a personal relationship with Sylvia. In the end, it was Byron who frowned and said, "Actually, we've thought too much. There's no need to find someone who's stronger than Sylvia. As long as the difference is not too great, we'll be able to achieve our goal by finding a few more." Good idea. The bishops were stunned when they heard this, and could not help but nod in agreement. If one-on-one did not work, then a group fight was very simple. In the church, there were not many people who could guarantee that they could defeat Sylvia, but if it was only about the same strength, then it was still easy to find a candidate. Narrowing his eyes, Byron continued, "Just in case, I have another candidate." How is Rooster?" "He's currently in a town not far from the church." "Rooster? Which Rooster?" "The former Holy Head Commander, Sylvia's spear teacher, Rooster." "Rooster would make a move against his own student, Sylvia." "Bishop Byron, if this is a joke, then it's obviously not." "No, this is not a joke." Waving his hand, Byron calmly said, "Rooster is Sylvia's teacher, but he's not a stubborn person. As long as we explain to him the serious consequences that Sylvia will bring for the stability of the church, he will agree and help us. After all, this is for Sylvia's safety." It had to be said that if Rooster's character was really like this, then Byron's words were very reasonable. The bishops pondered for a while and nodded in agreement. At this point, the embryonic form of an action plan against Sylvia was formed. The white-bearded old man tapped the table and said decisively, "Then let's do it this way. In the church, think of some reasons to expel people like Hebron from Holy Light City. As for Zachary, don't let him meet Sylvia. It doesn't matter if he dies or not, but I don't want to see the church torn down again. As for those outside the church, send someone to contact Holy Head Commander Rooster and select a few other candidates. This has to be done quickly." Finally, pause for a while. The white-bearded old man stood up and looked around with a solemn expression. "Everyone, we are now saving the church's martial arts genius that only appears once in 100 years, so no one can shrink back. Other than Bishop Byron, we have to try to communicate with Sylvia. If we can explain it to her clearly, then it's naturally best. And if the communication fails, at least we can stabilize her and not let her leave Holy Light City." Even though they knew that the possibility of successfully communicating with Sylvia was almost negligible, everyone still nodded when they heard this. Of course, this wasn't because of the glorious mission of saving a genius. They weren't that noble. To put it bluntly, this was for their own future. Moreover, some words didn't need to be said. Winning and killing were two completely different concepts. The former was much more difficult than the latter. So if Sylvia stubbornly refused to comply and fought to the death, then they couldn't be blamed. Chapter 775. In the evening, dusk gradually fell. Haha, little brother, thank you so much for today. I didn't come in vain this time. I visited every corner of the temple and finally got what I wanted. Master Klee, you're too polite. I just accompanied you for a walk. I didn't do anything. Haha, it's enough to walk around. It's an eye-opener. Amidst the laughter, Tang In patted the shoulder of the young knight who had accompanied him for the whole afternoon. He was very satisfied. This expression was not fake. After the young knight's guidance and explanation, Tang In was now very familiar with the Northern Temple. The 1,000 gold notes were not spent in vain, probably because he was eager to repay the kindness. Even if it was some forbidden areas of the temple, the young knight still told him all he knew after a little hesitation. After knowing this information, Tang In had already locked on to a few places, all of which were forbidden areas. If there was no accident, the evidence of the transaction record should be here. Everything went smoothly. Tang was naturally in a good mood. Just as he was about to praise a few more words, he suddenly caught a glimpse of something from the corner of his eyes. He suddenly shivered and hurriedly pulled the young knight behind the wall beside him. Master Klee, you're so strong. What's wrong? The young knight asked with a puzzled face behind the wall involuntarily. Oh, nothing, huh? Tang In chuckled twice and looked up. Oh, it's getting late. No wonder I feel a little hungry. He touched his lower abdomen. How about this, little brother? I'm going to relieve myself now. Please help me get some food and send it to my room, okay? Of course, Master Klee. I just don't know what your taste is. Tang In waved his hand indifferently. Whatever, I'm not a picky eater. Oh yes, I don't like noodles very much. I only like steamed rice. I can't help it. I'm old and my teeth can't. Is that okay? The young knight shook his head. Steamed rice. It may take some time, but other things are not a problem. That's good. Sorry to trouble you. Tang In paused for a moment, then suddenly frowned and bowed. He turned around and waved his hand as he quickly walked away. I can't. I need to relieve myself. Okay. Just as he was about to wave his hand, he found that Tang In had already disappeared around the corner. The young knight shrugged his shoulders and lowered his arm to touch something in his chest. Feeling the special texture of the gold note paper, he was overjoyed and murmured in a low voice, Master Carey is really a great philanthropist. The young knight hurriedly went to prepare the cooked rice, which was extremely time-consuming. However, he did not notice that not long after he left, the figure of the great philanthropist sneakily came back again. He leaned against the corner of the wall and carefully observed for a while. Then, with a flash of his body, he disappeared on the spot like a phantom a few hundred meters away in the most remote corner of the Northern Temple, in front of a few strange tree houses. Grandpa Hebron left. Yes, Lord Knight. Just this afternoon, Teacher Hebron received an order and should have left Holy Light City by now. Oh, I see. Thank you. Turning around and leaving, Sylvia couldn't help but look a little regretful. However, she didn't think too much about it. After all, the Temple of Light was in troubled times. It was normal for an expert like Hebron to go out and take charge. After leaving the area of the tree houses, Sylvia suddenly stopped and frowned. How long are you going to follow me? I'll just follow you until you go to sleep. Don't get the wrong idea. I'm a very decent person. In the twilight, Owens walked out with a lazy look on his face and spread out his hands. Sylvia naturally knew why Owens was following her. Her expression was a little gloomy, and she took a light breath. I'm not in a very good mood right now, so... Roland stroked his spear. I'm going to relax. If you continue to follow me, I don't mind using you to relax first. You don't have to be so ruthless. Owens held his forehead and was speechless. He then shrugged and said, I know what you want to do, but now that Zachary lives behind the temple, it's very close to the bishop's residence. You have no chance. Is that so? Sylvia said, non-committally. Then, she walked north. She was going in the direction of the temple. Obviously, she wasn't going to find trouble with Zachary. Seeing this, Owens couldn't help but ask in confusion, What are you doing? I said, relaxing. Sylvia didn't turn her head and waved the spear in her right hand. Don't follow me anymore. This is the last warning. Owens paused when he heard that. He thought for a moment and stood still. He waited until Xiao Weian's figure completely disappeared from his sight. After waiting for another 10 seconds or so, he sniffled and quickly chased after her. Don't follow? Are you kidding me? Sigh. It's really not easy for a friend to be like me. Thinking about it, I really admire myself. I'm simply too great. His muttering gradually weakened, and the rest of it was probably just words of praise for himself. Damn, is this narcissism or shamelessness? But these words sound like praise for me. Thinking about it this way, other than that annoying pretty boy, the rest of this guy is quite pleasing to the eye. A black shadow in the dark touched his chin and said so. Then, his figure flashed and disappeared from the spot. Owens dared to follow Sylvia. Naturally, he had something to rely on. Sylvia's strength was strong, but after all, she wasn't an assassin. For those who had bad intentions, she could rely on her keen sense of danger to see through them. But Owens was different. Although he wasn't a professional assassin, he couldn't have any intention to kill Sylvia. So as long as he was careful, he was confident that he wouldn't be noticed. Compared to Owens, the black shadow at the back relied on real tracking skills. As long as his skills were good enough, and he didn't take the risk to get close to Sylvia and Owens' senses, even if he had bad intentions, he could still successfully track them down. Sylvia, who was walking at the front, seemed to have really come out to relax. Soon, she left the range of the temple and entered the city. But then her whereabouts became a little erratic. She walked and stopped until she entered a densely packed residential area with complex alleys. Then, she suddenly sped up and disappeared in an instant. As mentioned before, the buildings in Vatican City were abnormally dense. In such a complex environment, it was undoubtedly difficult to track someone down. At the very least, Owens couldn't do it. Walking out of his hiding place, Owens looked at the densely packed residential area in front of him and sighed. I knew it would be like this. Well, let me guess where you're going. Let's try my luck. Half an hour later, in front of a small house in the city where letters and items were delivered, a person in a gray robe stepped in. His face couldn't be seen clearly. After looking up and down, the owner of the house couldn't tell whether the person in the gray robe was male or female. He could only say, "Good evening. May I ask if you're sending a letter or an item?" A letter. With a hoarse voice, the person in the gray robe took out a thick letter and placed it on the counter. Then he flicked out 3 shiny gold coins and swallowed the owner's question of where to send it. 3 gold coins. Indeed, there was no need to ask where to send it. As long as it wasn't in the northern wilderness, it could be delivered anywhere in the brand. Of course, it was only limited to towns. The temple headquarters. Okay, no problem. Looking at the words on the envelope, the owner nodded without hesitation and accepted the 3 gold coins. The person in the gray robe nodded and didn't say anything. He turned and left the house. After about 5 minutes, the wooden door of the house was pushed open again. The owner subconsciously raised his head and saw the handsome young man in holy armor. He couldn't help but be stunned. He recovered and hurriedly bowed. Good evening, sir. How can I help you? After all, he lived in the Holy Light City. Even if the owner wasn't a believer, he could tell that this armor wasn't ordinary. Of course I need your help, but you won't answer me even if I ask. Professional ethics, I understand. Scratching his head, Owens looked distressed as he recalled something. Let me think. How do I recite the incantation of mind magic? It's not professional after all. Mind magic, as the name implied, was magic that controlled the mind. Although it was only a low-level magic, it was very useful. Even a knight like Owens could cast it successfully. Of course, it could only be used on civilians. It couldn't be used on warriors with strong wills. After reciting the incantation vaguely, the owner's eyes suddenly became a little empty and confused. Then, Owens asked the first question and successfully got the answer he wanted to know. The person in the gray robe tightly wrapped up? Oh, that must be her. Yes. Where's the item she sent? Following the owner's guidance, Owens easily got the thick letter. Looking at the address on it, the corner of his mouth couldn't help but twitch. His expression was very helpless. Don't be like this. Even if you expose this dark secret, What can you do? They won't investigate this matter thoroughly. On the contrary, you will become very dangerous, sigh. Shaking his head and sighing, Owens put away the package and simply left the house. What forgot to undo the owner's mind magic? Please, it's not easy for a knight to remember the incantation to cast a spell. I can't ask for too much. Let's wait for about 10 minutes and let this spell disappear by itself. However, without waiting for the mind magic to expire, the person in the gray robe pushed open the wooden door of the house again. Looking at the stunned owner, she shook her head. You are very smart, but unfortunately, I am not stupid. She reached out and took out another thick letter, inserted it into the back of the envelope, and turned to leave. When she walked to the wooden door, she thought for a moment, turned around and recited a vague incantation. Then, the moment before the owner's eyes regained clarity, she quietly walked out of the door. Sir, after regaining consciousness, the owner unconsciously called out. Then, she turned her head and looked at the empty house. She couldn't help but be a little stunned. Then, 3 minutes later, Tang In touched his nose and appeared at the door of the house. He curled his lips and muttered, "What kind of mantis stalking a cicada is this? You simply don't put me, the Oriole, in your eyes." Chapter 776. After a while, Tang In returned to his residence. Byron was sitting at the table in the room with a gloomy face, while the young knight seemed to have been reprimanded. He stood at the side with his head lowered, looking aggrieved and dejected. "Zachary, where did you go?" Seeing Tang In step into the room, Byron's expression was grave. Although he did not roar in anger because he had taken advantage of him, his tone was not good either. "Yes, sir." Tang In seemed to have just seen Byron. He quickly walked forward and bowed respectfully. Then he awkwardly spread out his hands. "I went to relieve myself. I thought I could find my way back, but I went astray. I just found my way back. Sorry." Frowning, Tang In's explanation was similar to what the young knight had said before. Byron did not doubt it, but said unhappily, "Don't run around. If you don't want to die," he pointed to the young knight, "you will stay here for the next few days. You're not allowed to go anywhere. If there is anything, just let him go out and do it." "Yes, yes, yes." Tang In wiped the cold sweat on his forehead. He panicked and repeatedly said yes. Then he hesitated and asked, "Then Sylvia, this is not something you should know." Byron waved his hand and interrupted him. Then he snorted and held the bloody wound on his forehead. His eyes were filled with hatred. There will naturally be someone who will deal with her." He muttered and walked to the door. "That's it. Remember, you're not allowed to go anywhere. Otherwise, I will not be able to protect you." Tang In, who was disguised as Zachary, was now the only high-ranking member of the Bounty Hunter Guild. Therefore, even if it was not for the sake of money, Byron naturally did not want this only seedling to die in the hands of Sylvia. "Yes. Sir, have you had dinner? Let's eat together." After respectfully responding, Tang In looked at the still hot dishes on the table and asked politely. "No need." Byron did not even turn his head and walked out of the room. Rubbing his nose, Tang In looked at the knight standing at the side. "How about you accompany me to eat?" I already ate." After a while, Tang In took a knife and fork and sat at the table alone. He tasted a few mouthfuls of food. "Sigh, this is terrible. There's no oil at all. The kitchen must have been corrupted. TSK, Temple of Light. I've long seen through it. There's nothing good about it from the inside out." While complaining about the bland food, Tang In took out a thick envelope from his bosom and placed it on the table. He gently slid his finger across the envelope. Hiss! There was a neat cut, as if it was made by a knife. Then he lifted the envelope and knocked it a few times. More than 10 pieces of paper slid out of the envelope, and some fell to the ground. After a pause, Tang In shook his head and laughed. How big of a grudge is this? He actually wrote so much negative material. Let me see. After swallowing the clear soup, he casually grabbed a piece of paper from the table and began reading as he ate. "The clergy don't cultivate their temperament, betray their faith, accept bribes privately, and run amok with greed. Oh, your handwriting isn't bad. Every stroke. He grabbed the rest of the papers and picked up the ones on the ground. After skimming through them, Tang and shook his head slightly. There was a hint of mockery at the corner of his mouth. Needless to say, these papers were naturally the report letter that Sylvia intended to deliver to the Temple of Light headquarters. It was about the Bounty Hunter Guild and the recent well-founded scandal of the clergy in the market. There is no doubt that once this report letter personally written by Sylvia was exposed, it would definitely cause an uproar that would shock the world. If it was in the past, Tang Yin would naturally clap his hands and watch the fun with such a delightful event. But now he cannot. He had finally become the northern president of the Bounty Hunter Guild. The work of taking over David's side had not been completed yet, and the records and evidence had not been obtained. It could be said that Tang Yin's plan was not in place. Therefore, he naturally did not want the Temple of Light headquarters to send a large number of people to investigate this matter. Moreover, Tang Yin was not optimistic about the result of Sylvia's action. Was there no one like Sessman and Byron in the Temple of Light headquarters? What a joke. If this report letter was delivered, the result was likely to be that it would sink, and then the Temple of Light headquarters would send people to directly capture Sylvia. After a small commotion, nothing would happen. Oh, there might be a few big shots in the Northern Temple of Light who would be unlucky, but the reason for this was definitely not because of their own scandals, but because they did not keep an eye on Sylvia and let her know about these things. With a sneer, Tang Yin thought for a while, folded all the papers, and reached out to the flame of the oil lamp. The flame suddenly jumped up, and green smoke rose in spirals, illuminating Tang Yin's gloomy and uncertain expression. There was an indescribable sense of irony. It's rotten to the core, it's hopeless. Even if you scream and shout, what's the use? Let me help you, and directly sweep this garbage into the trash can. For the next 2 days, everything in the Temple of Light was as usual. The bell rang in the morning, and it was time for morning classes. A large number of local and foreign believers rushed to the square in front of the Temple of Light to pray devoutly. After that, most of the local believers went back to their homes to start the day, while the foreign believers either went to the clergyman to comfort them, pray for blessings, or wandered around the perimeter of the Temple of Light. This process would last for a whole day, and then the evening bell rang. The believers dispersed, and the clergyman began to clean up and eat. This kind of life was repeated over and over again. Over time, it was no wonder that most of the people here looked peaceful when Tang Yin saw them. The pace of life here is really too slow. Sylvia did not leave the Temple of Light, nor did she make a scene. She prayed, trained, and rested as usual. It was excessively quiet. She was probably waiting for someone from the Temple of Light headquarters to come down and investigate, or waiting for Tang Yin to be alone so that she could use this opportunity to kill him. Of course, Tang Yin did not care about this. Although he knew that the current tranquility of the Temple of Light should be an illusion, and from Byron's obscure tone, he could tell that they seemed to be targeting Sylvia, Tang Yin naturally had no interest in inquiring about it. Sylvia? Temple of Light? Who cares? I'm not a savior. If you want to fight, then go ahead. That was probably his attitude. And the record evidence that Tang Yin was most concerned about finally had some clues. He did not know if it was because he had been comfortable for too long that he was a little careless, or because of other reasons, but Tang Yin found that the defense here was generally lax. Even if it was some forbidden area, it was not difficult to sneak in. During the day, Tang Yin was grounded by Byron, and several Knights of Light guarded the door to prevent him from going out at will. But at night, Tang Yin had practically strolled through the entire forbidden area of the temple, relaxed and without any pressure. Although he had not found the record evidence, because Tang Yin had chosen the easiest place to sneak in, he was not discouraged. Moreover, with the importance of the record evidence, it was bound to be hidden in some forbidden area. Excluding the previous places, the target range was naturally small. Everything depended on tonight. Looking at the gradually darkening twilight outside the skylight, Tang Yin, who was dressed in black, clenched his fist and encouraged himself. Then he thought about it, and made a gesture in front of his chest, secretly praying to the position of the statue of the god of light. "We are so close, and I'm so pious. You should at least give me some face." After praying, Tang Yin felt relieved. Then he stepped on the wooden table, and his body soared into the air, accurately passing through the skylight. Click, with a slight sound, the skylight was closed outside, and the room instantly fell into darkness, silent. At the same time, in a room somewhere in the Temple of Light, Sylvia was staring at the oil lamp on the table, lost in thought. These days, her life seemed to be normal, but after such a thing happened, this normal meant that it was not normal. Anger, betrayal, depression. In just a few days, when Sylvia looked at the familiar scene of the Temple of Light again, she could no longer get any comfort from it. Looking at the familiar faces again, she suddenly felt that they were very strange. Or maybe she had never really recognized these people. The candlelight flickered, and the reflection on the wall was like a devil doing evil deeds dancing. Sylvia slowly stretched out her hands and supported her abnormally heavy forehead in slow motion. She pursed her lips, and her expression was pained. The ugly dark side of the clergy was only an isolated case, and the reason why it was so big now was because there were evil heretics playing tricks in it. The relationship between the Temple of Light and the Bounty Hunter Guild had existed for a long time, including the approval of several generations of popes. The means were not important. What was important was that the goal was the same, and that was for the belief of God. These days, all kinds of sayings like this kept circling around her ears. There was a time when Sylvia was a little confused and wondered if she was wrong this time. Otherwise, why did everyone have different opinions from her? So she did not reject the repeated lobbying of the bishops and try to listen to their opinions and understand their ideas. But, unfortunately, in the end, Sylvia still could not convince herself. Didn't the Temple of Light always advocate and represent justice? Just because to deal with evil, she had to abandon justice and turn into evil. What kind of logic was this? The reason why light was called light was because it was an existence that was completely opposite to darkness. Wasn't it? Just like pure white cloth, it was holy and pure white. So it became the robes of the clergy. And once it was dyed black, even if it was not pure black, it was still gray. So could it still be called holy? There were many questions that Xiao Weian could not answer by herself. When she asked the bishops, the result was often that they were speechless, or they would change the topic, saying that they were stubborn and did not think about the big picture. Yes, I am stubborn, but none of you can give me a reason to stop being stubborn. So how can I not be stubborn? Not thinking about the big picture, such a big picture that is full of misdeeds, and not thinking about changing it, but letting it continue to be eroded. Is this really good? Phew! Sylvia gasped for breath, and the candlelight on the table suddenly swayed, and the light in the room flickered, just like the complicated emotions in her heart. She was a little confused, and also a little irritated. Her eyes drooped slightly. Why did it become like this? Am I wrong, or are they wrong? I don't understand. It's better to wait for the people from the headquarters. She murmured in a low voice, getting weaker and weaker, and finally, only her voice was left. Sylvia was able to have her current cultivation, so naturally, she was not a stupid person. She understood the reason why Owens took away the letter. He was worried that the situation at the headquarters was the same as here, and then she would be retaliated against by some people. It was undeniable that this possibility was very high. But Sylvia still sent the letter, not for any other reason, but to give herself a little hope. At this time, Sylvia did not know who to believe. She was also very weak now, and could not withstand any blow. So even if she knew that she was playing a gamble that she would lose, she had to grab that glimmer of hope and gamble. Don't let me down again, even if it's just give me a reason. Father God, I beg you, her voice trailed off. At this time, knock, knock. Someone knocked on the door. Sylvia could not help but frown when she came back to her senses. She thought that it was the bishops who came to persuade her. I'm tired. Let's talk tomorrow. The knocking stopped, and then, creak, the unlocked wooden door was gently pushed open. Her eyes suddenly turned cold, and she took a deep breath. She got up and turned around. I say, Teacher Rust? Her tone suddenly raised, and Sylvia was suddenly overjoyed. Ha! Long time no see, Wei Wei. At the door, an old man with white hair and armor full of scars walked in with a laugh. He was still as sharp as ever. He bowed. Indeed, long time no see, Teacher Rust. I didn't expect to see you this time. Sylvia paused, as if she had realized something. She slowly straightened her body and pursed her lips. This time, you're also here to persuade me? Rust's expression froze when he heard this. Apparently, she had guessed his purpose. Sylvia's expression darkened, and her joy faded. I knew it. That's right, I won't hide it from you. I am indeed here for this matter. Rust was a straightforward person, and he did not hide his purpose. He said directly, Wei Wei, we are all warriors. We don't talk like those magicians who chant spells. We only like to talk with weapons. You did the right thing this time. Some of the bastards in the temple have gone too far, and they should be judged. Sylvia's eyes lit up when she heard this, and she asked, You think I did the right thing? Rust nodded without hesitation. Of course. Right is right, wrong is wrong, and they deserve to be punished. This is a simple matter. But he changed the topic and paused for a while continued. Wei Wei, the situation is different this time. Too many people are at fault, and if we judge them one by one, the temple will collapse. So you have to give us some time to get through this special period, and then let the temple slowly correct their mistakes. Sylvia's expression did not change, and she stared at Rust. Teacher, I can wait as long as it takes. But can you tell me that those who have done wrong will be punished, and the Bounty Hunter Guild will disappear completely? I want to tell you that it will, but... Rust shook his head and sighed. I'm afraid it won't work, because the temple will still be severely damaged. While there are scums everywhere, for example, the administrative staff in the various cities in Bran. Most of them are not good people, but they can't all be removed. So they will punish some people as a warning to others, and they will more or less restrain themselves. I understand. We still have to look at the big picture. We still have to let this ugly thing continue. Shaking her head, Xiao Wei'an's eyes gradually dimmed. She lowered her eyes and said, Teacher, I learned the spear from you when I was 7 years old. You always said that the spear is a servant of justice, and that it is only wielded for the glory of God and the safety of believers. But why is it that even now, I still can't find justice? Rust was startled, and he opened his mouth to say something, but no words came out. In the end, he just sighed. Sylvia continued. Also, the temple is different from the brand. Power can be checked and even compromised, but faith must not be tainted. Word by word, as if they were resolute and decisive. They collided harshly in every corner of the room and constantly reverberated. Then, the room fell into silence, and the warm atmosphere of the reunion gradually cooled down and finally disappeared completely. After a while, seeing Sylvia's unrelenting gaze, Rust sighed. Well, I knew I wouldn't be a good persuader. He slowly removed the spear from his waist and looked at Sylvia's incredulous expression. He shook his head and said, I'm sorry, Vivian, I can't let you continue. You will destroy the temple, and you will also harm yourself. After a pause, he continued, Like I said before, a warrior has to rely on his weapon to speak. Let me see the improvement of your spear skills over the years. Under the dim twilight, even the holy and pure divine palace of light was constantly surging with undercurrents. As the battle was about to begin, the thieves on the other side had successfully arrived at their destination. It was an inconspicuous side hall, but it was an out-and-out forbidden area of the temple. According to the young knight, this was actually an internal exhibition room of the temple, and it enshrined the relics left behind by some famous people when they were alive. It was said that there were also holy relics. However, the clergy here could only enter the first floor, so what was on the first 2 floors are mostly rumors. Pa! A soft sound drifted in the night wind, and then a figure glided through the air and landed on the roof of the 2nd floor of the side hall like a bat. Just below the eaves, the guards guarding the hall did not notice. Ha! Tang and laughed silently. As he put away the hook, he shook his head and sighed. This is the Temple of the North? The security is not even as good as the warehouse of a small landlord in the countryside. At least there are dogs. Of course, he was pretending to be innocent. In fact, although the Temple of the North was a little careless, the security was not that bad. The main reason was that the situation tonight was a little special. A large number of people were transferred to Sylvia's place, so Tang En had unknowingly taken advantage of the situation. After putting away the rope, Tang En looked up at the skylight on the third floor. After hesitating for a while, he finally decided to start searching from the second floor. He quickly swung his sword and accurately cut through the gap in the middle of the window, instantly cutting off the wooden bolt inside. He pulled down the window, dodged, rolled on the ground, and quickly scanned the surroundings. The series of actions were connected smoothly without any trace of artifice. Then, Tang En was dumbfounded. You're tuning into the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.